Nero Wolfe and the Haunted Church. It was a Wednesday in late October when the bells started ringing in my head, though they were ringing nowhere else, which should have been my first clue that something was off. The evening had settled into its usual rhythm at the brownstone on West 35th Street. Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms, with Theodore, fussing over his orchids until dinner. I'd finished the correspondence, updated the germination records, and was contemplating whether to brave the October drizzle for a movie when the doorbell rang at 7:43. Through the bulletproof glass panel beside the door, I could see a woman on the stoop, 50s, elegant in a charcoal coat with the collar turned up against the rain, clutching a leather portfolio like it contained the nuclear codes. Behind me, I heard the soft click of claws on the marble floor. Mars and Apollo had materialized from the office, ears forward, entirely professional. "Easy, boys," I said, checking the camera feed on the new security panel. The woman was alone, no suspicious bulges, no visible weapons, just the portfolio and an umbrella that had seen better days. I opened the door to the vestibule, then the inner door. "Yes." "Mr. Goodwin?" Her voice was steady but strained, like a violin string wound too tight. "I need to see Nero Wolfe, tonight. It's about a murder that hasn't happened yet, but will, unless someone stops it." That's always a promising start. "Mr. Wolfe doesn't see people in the evening without an appointment," I said, which was true 99 times out of 100. "He's at dinner in approximately." I checked my watch, 17 minutes, and disturbing that ritual requires an act of God, or a very substantial retainer. "I can pay." She opened the portfolio with trembling fingers and extracted a cashier's check. Even from where I stood, I could see it was made out to Nero Wolfe for $50,000. "This is just to listen. I'll pay whatever it takes if he accepts the case." I've learned to recognize desperation. This was the genuine article. "Your name?" "Katrina Lockwood. My husband disappeared 3 days ago from St. Anselm's Church in Harlem. The police say he's probably run off with a mistress or his secretary, but they're wrong. He's dead, and whoever killed him is going to kill again." Mars growled softly. Apollo shifted his weight, still watching her. "I've learned to pay attention when the Dobermans react to people. They're better judges of character than most juries." "Come in, Mrs. Lockwood. Wait in the front room. I'll see what I can do." I showed her to the front room, the one we never use except for clients who might be dangerous or annoying, and left Mars stationed outside her door. Apollo followed me to the kitchen, where Fritz was putting the finishing touches on the evening meal: broiled squab with a tarragon reduction, wild rice, end of salad, and a pear tart that smelled like heaven's bakery. "Fritz, is he in a good mood?" "He found aphids on the Oncidium cephalatum, 3 aphids. He executed them personally. What do you think?" "I think I'm about to ruin his dinner. There's a woman with $50,000 who says her husband was murdered at a church that's supposedly haunted." Fritz raised one eyebrow. That was as close as he came to expressing shock. "A haunted church? Monsieur Wolfe will refuse." "Probably. But 50,000 just to listen? That's a lot of aphid revenge." I went up the stairs to the plant rooms on the roof. The elevator would have been quieter, but I wanted Wolfe to hear me coming. Fair warning and all that. Through the glass door of the warm room, I could see his vast bulk moving among the benches, Theodore hovering nearby with a spray bottle. The cattleyas were in bloom, purple and white explosions of color against the green darkness. I opened the door. "Sorry to interrupt, but there's a woman downstairs with a cashier's check for $50,000 and a story about a murdered husband in a haunted church. She wants to hire you tonight." Wolfe turned slowly, his massive head tilting down to regard me with the expression of a man who has just discovered a slug in his salad. "Fool. Haunted." Her word, not mine. The husband vanished from St. Anselm's Church in Harlem 3 days ago. She's convinced he's dead. Churches are not haunted. Death is not haunted. Superstition is the refuge of weak minds seeking patterns where none exist. He turned back to the cattleyas. "Tell her no. 50,000 just to listen to her story, plus whatever fee you set if you take the case." "Archie." He didn't turn around. "I am not a ghost hunter. I am a detective. The two vocations are not compatible." "Agreed. But 50 grand for an hour of your time? That's $1,250 per minute. That's... I can calculate." He moved to the next bench, studying a phalaenopsis with excessive interest. Nevertheless, no. She says someone else will die if you don't help. She seems pretty convinced. Then let the police protect them. I sighed. When Wolfe decided to be immovable, he made mountains look unstable. Okay, I'll send her away. I'll also deposit this check into our account tomorrow, since she's leaving it as payment for the consultation she's not getting. I'm sure the IRS will have questions about that income. His shoulders shifted, a movement that in a smaller man would have been a shrug. You are transparent in your manipulations, Archie. Maybe, but I'm right. Also, Fritz says dinner's in 12 minutes, and I told her you'd see her afterward. So technically, you have time to refuse her in person, which is more polite than having me do it. The massive head swung toward me again. His brown eyes, half buried in the folds of his face, were not amused. You presume? I get paid to presume, among other things. Very well, after dinner. But I will not accept a case involving ghosts, spirits, haunts, or any other manifestations of primitive superstition. Is that clear? Crystal, like bulletproof glass. He grunted and returned to his orchids. I retreated before he could change his mind. Dinner was excellent, as always. Wolfe ate with the focused precision of a surgeon, occasionally commenting on the squab's preparation or Fritz's masterful handling of the tarragon. I did justice to the meal while mentally rehearsing how I'd present Mrs. Lockwood's case, assuming she was still waiting and hadn't fled from the combined intimidation of Mars and the front room's Victorian gloom. At 9:15, we moved to the office. Caesar and Minerva were already there, sprawled on their respective rugs near the bookshelves. Diana appeared from somewhere and took up position by the door. The Dobermans had been with us for 6 months now, and they'd integrated into the household rhythm like they'd always been part of it. Wolfe had initially resisted. Dogs are for yards and hunting, not offices, but they'd won him over with their intelligence and dignity. Also, they didn't bark stupidly or chew furniture, which met his minimum standards for cohabitation. I went to the front room and collected Mrs. Lockwood. She'd removed her coat, revealing a dark blue dress and a pearl necklace that was probably real. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. She'd done her crying earlier. Mrs. Lockwood, this is Nero Wolfe. She stopped 3 paces into the room, taking in the sight. Wolfe behind his desk, 1/7 of a ton of genius in a yellow shirt, the Dobermans positioned like silent sentinels, the bookshelves rising to the ceiling, the safe disguised as part of the wall, the red leather chairs, and me settling into my position at my desk with my notebook ready. Mr. Wolfe, thank you for seeing me. Sit down, madam. He gestured to the red leather chair nearest his desk. You have paid for my time, though I am not inclined toward cases involving supernatural phenomena. Nevertheless, I will listen. Archie, beer. I went to the kitchen and returned with 2 chilled bottles of Remmers and a glass on a tray. Wolfe poured with the concentration he brought to anything worth doing properly. Mrs. Lockwood watched, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Now then, Wolfe said when he'd sampled the beer and pronounced it acceptable, your husband has disappeared. You believe he's dead. The police disagree. What evidence supports your conclusion? She took a breath. My husband, James Lockwood, was a real estate developer. 3 years ago, he became obsessed with St. Anselm's Church on West 131st Street, a Gothic revival building from 1887, mostly abandoned, falling apart. He bought it from the Archdiocese for almost nothing and began a restoration project. It became his passion. He spent millions on it. Structural repairs, the roof, the windows, the organ. And 3 days ago, he went there Sunday evening, around 10, said he wanted to check on some work the contractors had done. He never came home. His car was found parked outside the church Monday morning. The doors were locked. The alarm was still set. No signs of struggle, no blood, nothing. Just gone. Wolfe drank beer. The police investigated. Detective Rowcliffe came to the house. He asked if James had mistresses, gambling debts, business problems. He seemed more interested in James's character than his disappearance. He said most missing persons cases resolve themselves when the person decides to come home. I knew Rowcliffe. He was as subtle as a car alarm and twice as annoying. If he'd been assigned to the case, either the department didn't take it seriously or Kramer was short-handed. What makes you certain he's dead? Wolfe asked. Because James was murdered once before. The office went silent. Even the Dobermans seemed to stop breathing. Explain. Wolfe said flatly. Mrs. Lockwood opened her portfolio and extracted a photograph. I rose to take it from her and placed it on Wolfe's desk. It showed a younger James Lockwood, 45, maybe 50, with dark hair going grey, square jaw, confident smile, expensive suit. The kind of man who counted money by the building. 12 years ago, she continued, James was attacked in his office by a business partner who discovered James had embezzled from their company. The partner, Raymond Hollister, shot James twice, once in the shoulder, once in the chest. James survived, barely. Hollister went to prison for 20 years. He was released 6 weeks ago. Ah, said Wolfe. He set down his glass with precision. And you believe Mr. Hollister has enacted revenge? The police checked. Hollister has an alibi. He was at a halfway house in Jersey the night James disappeared. But alibis can be bought, and there's something else. She extracted another document from the portfolio. I found this in James's desk 3 weeks ago. I retrieved it. It was a letter, handwritten on plain white paper. Your sins find you out, James. The dead remember. The church remembers. Come alone at midnight, or everyone will know what you are. No signature, no date. Did you show this to the police? I asked. Yes. Rowcliffe said it could be from anyone. A disgruntled contractor, a business rival, someone trying to extort money. He said James probably ignored it, and it had nothing to do with his disappearance. But you think differently, Wolfe said. I know James. He was terrified when I found that letter. He said it was nothing, just someone's idea of a joke. But he changed after that. He started going to the church at odd hours, late at night, early morning. He became obsessed with the basement level, the old crypt beneath the sanctuary. He had contractors seal off parts of it, install new locks, new security. When I asked why, he said it was just protecting the restoration investment. But he was lying. Wolfe leaned back in his chair, fingers interlaced across his middle mound. Mrs. Lockwood, I appreciate your concern for your husband, but this appears to be a police matter, a possible kidnapping or murder with a clear suspect. Why come to me? Because of what the caretaker told me yesterday. Her voice dropped. His name is Bernard Quinn. He's been with the church for 30 years, stayed on when the archdiocese closed it, continued working for James. Yesterday afternoon I went there looking for clues the police might have missed. Bernard was frightened. He told me he'd heard the organ playing Sunday night after midnight, long after James should have left. He went into the sanctuary to investigate, and the organ was playing itself. No one was there. Preposterous, Wolfe muttered. He also said he saw lights in the crypt, candles, and heard voices chanting in Latin. When he went down to investigate, the lights vanished, and he found a rope hanging from the choir loft railing, just hanging there, swaying, like someone had been testing it, or using it. Did he report this to the police? He tried. Rowcliffe laughed at him, told him the organ probably has an electronic timer, and the candles were homeless people who'd broken in. But Bernard says the church is sealed tight, no way to break in without triggering alarms, and the organ doesn't have a timer. James had it fully restored by specialists. It's completely manual. Wolfe closed his eyes. When he does that, it means he's either falling asleep or thinking furiously. Given the beer was mostly untouched, I figured it was the latter. Mrs. Lockwood, he said finally, eyes still closed, what precisely do you want from me? Find out what happened to James. If he's dead, I want to know who killed him and why. If he's alive, she paused. If he's alive and hiding, I want to know that too. I want the truth, Mr. Wolfe. The police aren't going to give it to me. Wolfe opened his eyes and reached for his beer. He drank, set the glass down, and stared at the wall beyond Mrs. Lockwood's head. The wall where the map of New York hung, showing all 5 boroughs in precise detail. Archie, your opinion? I put down my pen. Interesting story. The letter's definitely a threat, probably connected to the embezzlement 12 years ago. The ex-partner with an alibi is too convenient. The rope in the choir loft is either a failed suicide attempt or a warning. The organ playing itself is either electronic malfunction, intruder, or ghost. I paused. Ghosts do not exist, Wolfe said firmly. However, humans who create the illusion of ghosts do exist, and they invariably have prosaic motives: greed, revenge, fear. Mrs. Lockwood, I will accept your retainer and investigate your husband's disappearance. My fee is $10,000 per day plus expenses. If I recover your husband alive, you will pay a bonus of 25,000. If I determine he is dead and identify his killer, the bonus is 50,000. Are these terms acceptable?" She nodded immediately. "Yes, whatever it takes." "Very well. Archie will require access to St. Anselm's Church, your husband's office and home records, and a list of everyone connected to the restoration project. I will also need the names and addresses of Mr. Hollister and anyone else who might bear your husband a grudge. Can you provide these items tomorrow morning?" "I'll have everything ready by 8. 9, Wolfe corrected. "I am not a barbarian. 9:30 would be better." She rose, and I walked her to the door. Mars and Apollo escorted us to the vestibule, their nails clicking softly on the marble. As I helped her with her coat, she turned to me. "Mr. Goodwin, do you think there's any chance James is alive?" I could have lied. Instead, I said, "I think Mr. Wolfe will find the truth. That's the best chance you've got." She nodded and stepped out into the October rain. When I returned to the office, Wolfe was scowling at the letter, holding it up to the light like it might reveal secrets under proper illumination. "Well," I said, "this was written by an educated person. The script is controlled, the language formal. Your sins find you out is biblical. Numbers chapter 32. The references to memory and the church suggest someone with intimate knowledge of Mr. Lockwood's past. Hollister, possibly, or someone who knows about Hollister and is using that knowledge as psychological warfare." He set the letter down. "Tomorrow you will visit St. Anselm's Church. Speak with this caretaker, examine the premises, and form your impressions. I want facts, Archie, not ghost stories." "Got it. No ectoplasm." "Precisely." He finished his beer and stood, a process that involved considerable engineering. "I am going to bed. Instruct Fritz that tomorrow's breakfast should include the buckwheat cakes. Cases involving churches always require extra carbohydrates." He lumbered out. Caesar heaved himself up and followed, as he did every night. The Alpha Doberman had adopted Wolfe as his personal charge, and nothing short of a direct order could separate them after 9 p.m. I sat at my desk, looking at the letter, the photograph, and my notes. Somewhere in Harlem, St. Anselm's Church waited in the darkness. Whether it was haunted by ghosts or just by human wickedness remained to be seen. But I had a feeling tomorrow was going to be interesting. Diana came over and rested her head on my knee, her dark eyes sympathetic. I scratched behind her ears. "Yeah, girl, I know, Wolfe says no ghosts, but somebody's playing with bells and organs in the middle of the night, and I'm betting they're not doing it for fun." She huffed softly, which I chose to interpret as agreement. Outside, the October rain continued its steady percussion against the bulletproof windows. Somewhere in the city, a man was missing, dead, hidden, or running, and somewhere, a church full of shadows waited to tell its secrets. I finished my notes, locked the letter and check in the safe, and headed upstairs. Tomorrow would come early enough. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of iron-grey sky that makes you want to crawl back under the covers and pretend civilization hasn't been invented yet. I was at my desk by 8:30, having survived Fritz's buckwheat cakes and 3 cups of coffee strong enough to strip paint. Mrs. Lockwood arrived at 9:30 sharp, with a banker's box full of documents and the determined expression of someone who'd been up all night organizing things. I settled her in the front room with more coffee, while Wolfe finished breakfast. Mars kept her company, lying near the door with the air of a professional bodyguard taking a coffee break. At 10, we reconvened in the office. Wolfe listened while Mrs. Lockwood walked us through her husband's business records, the restoration project files, and a list of people connected to St. Anselm's Church. The cast of characters was about what you'd expect. Bernard Quinn, the caretaker, 71, lived in a small apartment attached to the church basement. Former seminary student, never ordained. 30 years keeping St. Anselm standing, despite budget cuts and archdiocese neglect. Father Michael Driscoll, the last resident priest before the church closed. Now semi-retired, living in Queens, still had keys to the building, had worked with James Lockwood on the restoration planning. Penelope Ashford, art historian and preservation consultant. James had hired her to authenticate the church's stained glass windows and religious artifacts. Marcus Webb, the construction foreman. His company, Webb Restoration, had the contract for all structural work. Raymond Hollister, the obvious suspect. Out of prison 6 weeks. living in a halfway house in Newark, had every reason to hate James Lockwood. Wolfe absorbed the information like a sponge absorbing beer, which is to say, with great capacity and zero visible effort. When Mrs. Lockwood finished, he leaned back in his chair. The church itself described its layout. She pulled out architectural plans. It's a traditional cruciform design, main sanctuary with center aisle, choir loft above the entrance, altar at the east end. The transepts have side altars and confessionals. Below the main level is a large undercroft, originally used for storage and as a crypt. That's where the trouble is. Trouble. James became obsessed with the crypt 3 months ago. He had Webb's crew install steel doors, new locks, ventilation systems, dehumidifiers. He said it was to protect artifacts stored down there, but he wouldn't let me see what he was protecting. He'd go down there alone, sometimes for hours. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. What artifacts? I don't know. The church's historical records mention some valuable items, medieval manuscripts, gold chalices, reliquaries containing saints' bones, but most of that was supposedly sold off decades ago when the archdiocese needed money. Supposedly. Penelope Ashford thinks some items were never properly catalogued. She says churches are terrible about inventory. Things disappear into basements and are forgotten for generations. Interesting. Wolfe shifted his bulk. Archie, you will visit the church today. Examine the crypt, speak with Mr. Quinn, and determine if there are any tangible reasons for this alleged haunting. Mrs. Lockwood, you will provide Archie with keys and written authorization to access the premises. Already done. She handed me an envelope, keys, alarm codes, and a letter stating you're working for me. Bernard knows you're coming. I pocketed the envelope. Anything specific I should look for? Evidence, Wolfe said flatly. Evidence that someone is manufacturing supernatural phenomena for mundane purposes. Also, evidence of Mr. Lockwood's actual fate. If he's dead, there should be forensic traces. If he's alive, there should be a logical reason for his disappearance. Ghosts leave no evidence because they don't exist. Therefore, whatever you find will be explicable. Unless, I said, it's actually haunted. Archie. Just checking your conviction level. It's high. Got it. Mrs. Lockwood stood. Call me the moment you know anything. Please. I walked her out. When I returned, Wolfe was studying the architectural plans with the intensity he usually reserved for orchid catalogues. Something interesting? I asked. The crypt is unusually large, extends beyond the church's foundation footprint. See here? He tapped the plans. These dotted lines indicate the original structure from 1887, but these solid lines show additions made in 1923. The crypt was expanded, and these notations suggest connection to adjacent utility tunnels. Curious. You think Lockwood found something down there? Something worth getting killed over? I think Mr. Lockwood's obsessive renovation of the crypt suggests more than architectural enthusiasm. People do not install steel security doors to protect empty rooms. He pushed the plans toward me. Take these. Also take your camera, tape measure, and flashlight. And Archie? Yes. Take Diana. Her instincts are excellent, and churches are often frequented by those who are not what they seem. That was Wolfe's way of saying he was worried. When he wants me to take a Doberman on an investigation, it means he thinks there's actual danger, not just the theoretical kind. Will do. Anything else? Yes. If the organ begins playing of its own accord, resist the urge to run screaming. Instead, determine the mechanism. Everything has an explanation. Even in Harlem. Especially in Harlem, he said dryly. Geographic location does not suspend the laws of physics. I took Diana, my camera, and the plans. The drive to West 131st Street took 40 minutes through late morning traffic that made me nostalgic for the days when horses were the primary transportation hazard. Diana rode in the back seat, nose pressed to the window, watching the city slide past with the alert interest of a canine sociologist. St. Anselm's church squatted on its lot, like a stone fortress that had seen better centuries. Gothic revival, as promised, pointed arches, flying buttresses, tower with a bell that probably hadn't rung since Eisenhower was president. The limestone facade was dark with city grime, and several of the stained glass windows had been replaced with plywood. But the bones were good. You could see what it had been, a monument to faith and craftsmanship, in an era when both were considered worth the investment. James Lockwood's car wasn't there. The police had presumably impounded it. I parked in the small lot behind the church, near a battered Toyota that probably belonged to Bernard Quinn. Diana emerged from the car with professional alertness, nose working, ears scanning for threats. "Easy, girl. We're just here for conversation and atmosphere." The rear entrance was a heavy wooden door with iron hinges and 3 deadbolts. I used Mrs. Lockwood's keys, punched in the alarm code, and stepped into the cool darkness of the church's undercroft. The smell hit me first. Stone, dust, candle wax, and something else. Something organic and faintly unpleasant, like old flowers left too long in a vase. Diana's hackles rose slightly. She pressed against my leg, a low rumble building in her chest. "I know, but we're professionals. Let's find Mr. Quinn." The undercroft was a maze of stone corridors, lined with storage rooms, old offices, and spaces that had probably once been living quarters for priests or nuns. Electric lights had been installed, bare bulbs hanging from exposed conduits, but half of them were out, leaving pools of darkness between islands of dim yellow light. I found Bernard Quinn in what appeared to be his apartment. 3 rooms at the northeast corner of the basement, modestly furnished, obsessively clean. He was sitting at a small table reading a leather-bound book that looked older than the church. When Diana and I appeared in his doorway, he looked up slowly, like a man who'd learned not to make sudden movements. "Mr. Goodwin." His voice was soft, cultured, touched with an Irish accent that had mostly faded but still lingered on certain vowels. "That's right. Mrs. Lockwood said you were expecting me." "Yes." He closed the book carefully and stood. He was tall, thin, white-haired, wearing a cardigan that had been patched at the elbows. His face was lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from decades of worry and prayer, in equal measure. "Please, come in. You've brought a beautiful creature." Diana relaxed slightly at his tone. Dogs know kindness when they hear it. "This is Diana. She's friendly unless you're not." "I'm friendly, Mr. Goodwin, at least toward those who mean no harm." He gestured to a chair. "Coffee? Tea? I have both, though neither is fancy." "Coffee would be great." He busied himself with an ancient percolator while I sat. His apartment was spare but comfortable. Narrow bed, desk piled with books, crucifix on the wall, photographs of the church in various stages of its history. Through the single small window, you could see the stone foundation at ground level, and beyond that the legs of passers-by on the sidewalk. "Mrs. Lockwood told me what you reported," I said. "The organ playing, the candles, the rope. Tell me exactly what you saw Sunday night." Quinn poured coffee into mismatched mugs and sat across from me. His hands trembled slightly, not from age, but from something else. Fear maybe, or exhaustion. I was in bed reading. Around 11:45, I heard the organ. Faint at first, then louder. Someone was playing the toccata and fugue in D minor. Bach. It's a piece that's often associated with horror films, but it's actually quite beautiful. Mr. Lockwood loved it. I went upstairs to see if he was still here, perhaps showing the organ to someone. "Through which door?" "The main stairway from the undercroft to the sacristy. When I reached the sanctuary, the organ was playing, but no one was in the loft. I could see it clearly. The keyboard was moving, the stops were pulled, but there was no one sitting at the bench. Could someone have been hiding? Not without me seeing them. The loft is open, no screens or curtains, and the ladder to the loft was pulled up. No one could have climbed down without lowering it." Diana had settled near my feet, but her attention was fixed on Quinn. She was reading him the way dogs do. Body language, scent, the 1,000 small signals that humans miss. "What did you do then?" I stood there frozen, watching. The piece played for another 2 minutes, then stopped. Just stopped. The keys were still. The stops reset themselves. I heard them click back into position. Then the lights in the crypt came on. I could see the glow from the stairway door. "You went down to investigate?" "I did. I'm old, Mr. Goodwin, but I'm not a coward. I've been in this church for 30 years. I've seen many strange things, but nothing like this." He sipped his coffee. The crypt was lit with candles, dozens of them, arranged in a circle around something. As I got closer, the candles went out, all of them, simultaneously, and I heard voices chanting in Latin. Old Latin, the kind we used in the Mass before Vatican II. "Did you recognize any of the words?" "Just one phrase repeated, Requiem aeternam dona eis, Domine. Rest eternal grant unto them, O Lord." It's from the funeral Mass. The hair on my neck did something uncomfortably close to rising. Diana noticed and licked my hand reassuringly. Then what? The voices stopped. I found my flashlight. I always carry one, and went to where the candles had been. They were gone. No trace. But something else was there. He reached into his cardigan pocket and placed a small object on the table. This. It was a coin. Old, corroded, but still identifiable. A silver dollar from 1887. The year the church was built, I said. Yes, and that's not all. He stood and gestured for me to follow. I need to show you something. We went deeper into the undercroft, Diana padding silently beside us. Quinn led me through corridors I hadn't seen, past storage rooms filled with broken pews and moth-eaten vestments, until we reached a heavy steel door that looked distinctly out of place in the 19th century stonework. This is what Mr. Lockwood installed 3 months ago. Cost $40,000, he told me. Said it was to protect the historical artifacts. Did he tell you what artifacts? No, and I'd been here 30 years without needing a steel door to protect anything. Quinn extracted a key ring from his pocket, not Mrs. Lockwood's set, but his own, and unlocked the door. 3 separate locks, each requiring a different key. He gave me copies after the installation, said I should check on things regularly, but he also said I should never go in alone at night. Did he say why? No, but I got the impression he was afraid of something. The door swung open on well-oiled hinges. Beyond it, stone steps descended into darkness, even thicker than the basement's usual gloom. Quinn flipped a switch, and LED lights blazed to life. Modern, bright, absolutely at odds with the medieval atmosphere. After you, Mr. Goodwin. Though I warn you, you may not like what you find. I didn't like it already, but I went down anyway. Diana followed, her nails clicking on the stone steps. Quinn came last, pulling the door closed behind us. Not locked, just closed. The crypt was larger than the architectural plans suggested, a vaulted stone chamber about 60 feet long and 30 wide, with smaller alcoves branching off in several directions. The ceiling was maybe 12 feet high, supported by Gothic columns with carved capitals depicting various saints and angels. The air was cold and dry, kept that way by industrial dehumidifiers humming in 2 corners. And in the center of the room, on a raised stone platform, was a table. Not a church table, not an altar. A laboratory table, stainless steel, modern, with built-in lighting and magnification equipment. Around it were filing cabinets, storage units, and what looked like a chemical analysis setup, complete with microscope and testing equipment. What the hell? I said. Indeed, Quinn said quietly. I found this 2 weeks ago when I came down to check the dehumidifiers. Mr. Lockwood was here, working. He asked me to leave immediately. He wasn't rude, but he was urgent. I walked around the table. On it were several items, photographs of church artifacts, reference books about medieval religious items, and most interesting, a notebook filled with James Lockwood's handwriting. I picked it up. Diana suddenly growled, not at Quinn, at something else. She was staring at one of the alcoves, her whole body rigid. What is it, girl? She moved toward the alcove, hackles fully raised now. I followed, pulling out my flashlight. Quinn stayed by the stairs, watching nervously. The alcove was maybe 10 feet deep, carved into the stone foundation, empty, except for marks on the floor, dark stains that could have been water damage, or could have been something else, and on the wall, scratched into the stone, were words. He knows. Seal it. Hide everything. November 1. Below that, in different handwriting, fresher. Too late. Quinn, come look at this. He approached reluctantly. When he saw the writing, his face went pale. That wasn't here before. I swear. I check this room regularly. When was the last time? Friday afternoon, 3 days before Mr. Lockwood disappeared. I photographed the wall, the stains, the entire alcove. Then I went back to the laboratory table and flipped through Lockwood's notebook. Most of it was technical, chemical compositions, dating methods, provenance research, but on the last page, 3 words were written in increasingly desperate script. Hollister knows. Hollister knows. Hollister knows. I closed the notebook and looked at Quinn. Did Mr. Lockwood ever mention Raymond Hollister to you? The man who shot him. Once, he said Hollister was getting out of prison soon, and he was worried, but he didn't elaborate. Did Hollister ever come here? Not that I know of, but I'm not here all night. Every night. Someone could have come after I went to bed. I considered that. The church had an alarm system, but alarms can be defeated. And if Lockwood had given Hollister a key, or if Hollister had stolen one, he could have had access. Tell me about the rope you found hanging from the choir loft. Quinn shuddered visibly. Monday morning, I was doing my rounds after the police left, went into the sanctuary, and saw it hanging from the railing. 15, maybe 20 feet of rope, new rope, nylon, just hanging there, swaying slightly, like someone had tested its strength. I called the police. Detective Rowcliffe came back, looked at it, said it was probably homeless people playing a prank. He didn't even take it as evidence. Where's the rope now? I cut it down and burned it. I know I shouldn't have, but it frightened me. It looked like a message. What kind of message? A hanging rope. What else could it mean? Someone wanted us to know they could kill here, that the church wasn't safe. I snapped photos of the laboratory setup, made notes on dimensions and equipment, then headed back upstairs. Diana seemed relieved to leave the crypt. Her tail, which had been down the entire time we were below, returned to its normal alert position once we emerged into the basement. Mr. Quinn, I need to see the sanctuary and the organ loft. Can you show me? Of course. The sanctuary was breathtaking despite its decay. The main space was perhaps 80 feet long, 40 wide, with soaring Gothic arches meeting in a vaulted ceiling 40 feet above. The pews had been removed. Renovation work, Quinn explained, leaving a vast empty floor of patterned tile. At the east end, the altar stood on a raised platform, flanked by stone columns carved with elaborate reliefs. The stained glass windows on both sides were masterpieces, jewel-toned scenes from the life of Christ, each panel a contained world of color and light. But what dominated the space was the organ at the west end, in the loft above the main entrance. It was massive, 3 keyboards, hundreds of pipes rising 20 feet toward the ceiling, the largest ones at least 8 inches in diameter. The console gleamed with new wood and polished brass. Lockwood had it fully restored? I asked. Every pipe cleaned, every mechanical component rebuilt. Cost over $200,000. It's fully mechanical, no electronics except for the LED light strips he added for aesthetics. Everything else is wind, wood, and metal. I climbed the ladder to the loft, a sturdy wooden affair that could be pulled up via a pulley system. The loft was open to the sanctuary below, offering a clear view of the entire space. The organ console sat in the center, surrounded by sheet music stands and a bench with hand-sewn cushions. I examined the keyboards carefully. They were ivory and ebony, worn smooth by decades of use. The stops were wooden, labeled in Latin and English, diapason, flute, trumpet, vox humana. I pulled one experimentally. Nothing happened, no sound, no mechanical response. It requires wind pressure, Quinn called from below. There's a blower motor in the basement. You have to turn it on first. Can you turn it on remotely? No, there's a switch in my apartment, but you have to be down there to activate it. I checked the bench, the music stands, the floor around the console. No signs of hidden electronics, no timers, no wireless receivers. If someone had been up here Sunday night playing the organ, they'd done it the traditional way by physically pressing the keys. But Quinn swore no one had been here. I took measurements, photos, notes. Then I climbed back down, and we made our way to the bell tower, accessible through a narrow spiral staircase in the northwest corner. The stairs were stone, worn smooth by centuries of feet, barely wide enough for one person. Diana refused to follow. Smart dog. So I left her with Quinn and went up alone. The bell tower was exactly what you'd expect. Circular chamber, open to the elements on 4 sides. Massive bronze bell hanging in the center from an ancient wooden yoke. The bell was inscribed with Latin text and a date. Below it, hanging down through the floor, was the rope that rang it. Thick hemp, knotted at intervals, disappearing into darkness below. I leaned over the edge and looked down into the sanctuary. You could see everything from here. The altar, the empty floor, Quinn and Diana far below looking up at me. If someone wanted to watch the sanctuary without being seen, this would be the place. I checked the bell rope. It was slightly frayed near the top, where it looped through the yoke mechanism, but otherwise intact. I pulled it experimentally. The bell moved slightly but didn't ring. The clapper was tied off with wire, preventing it from striking. "Quinn," I called down. "Why is the bell disabled?" His voice echoed up. "Mr. Lockwood had it tied off last month. Said the vibrations were damaging the tower structure. He was planning to have engineers assess it before allowing it to ring again, which meant someone couldn't ring the bell even if they wanted to." Interesting. I descended carefully. Diana greeted me with obvious relief, and Quinn looked equally glad to have me back at ground level. "Is there anything else you need to see?" he asked. "The confessionals, and any other spaces where someone could hide." We checked the confessionals, 3 of them, built into alcoves along the north wall. They were standard design, wooden booths with carved screens separating priest from penitent, shabby velvet kneelers, dust thick enough to write your name in, no signs of recent use. Then we checked the sacristy, the storage closets, the transepts, every space large enough to conceal a person. Nothing. The church was clean, too clean. If someone had been here Sunday night playing the organ, they'd left no trace. Except, I was about to leave when Diana did something unusual. She walked to one of the pews, one of the few that remained, pushed against the south wall and started sniffing the seat intently. Then she sat and looked at me with her "I found something" expression. I examined the pew. Nothing obvious, but Diana doesn't alert for nothing. I ran my hand under the seat and felt something, a small object wedged into the joint between seat and back. I worked it free. It was another silver dollar, identical to the one Quinn had found. Same date. "Quinn, have you seen this before?" He examined it. No. But Mr. Lockwood was fascinated by the church's history. He'd been researching the original construction, the founding families, the first priests. He had boxes of documents in his office, records from the archdiocese, newspaper clippings, photographs. Did he find anything unusual? Quinn hesitated. He mentioned once that the church had been built with unusual funding, something about money that came from sources the archdiocese preferred not to acknowledge. What kind of sources? He didn't say, but he seemed troubled by it. Said the past had a way of demanding payment for old debts. I pocketed the coin and looked around the sanctuary one more time. The afternoon light was filtering through the stained glass, throwing patterns of red and gold across the floor, beautiful and eerie in equal measure. "Mr. Quinn, thank you for your time. If you think of anything else, call me immediately." I gave him my card. "And if you hear the organ playing again, don't investigate alone. Call the police, then call me." "Mr. Goodwin, do you think Mr. Lockwood is still alive?" I could have lied. Instead I said, "I think someone wanted him gone, and they went to a lot of trouble to make it look supernatural. That's usually not a good sign. But until we find evidence otherwise, we assume he's alive and findable." Quinn nodded, but his eyes said he didn't believe it. Diana and I left through the main entrance, walking down the stone steps to the street. The October afternoon was cold and grey, but compared to the church interior, it felt warm. Diana seemed relieved to be back in normal air. I looked back at St. Anselm's. It stood there like something out of a nightmare. Gothic spires reaching toward the sky, windows dark despite the afternoon light, the whole structure radiating a sense of watchful waiting. If Wolfe wanted facts, I had plenty. Chemistry lab in the crypt, mysterious writing on walls, coins from 1887, an organ that might or might not play itself, and a missing millionaire with secrets in his past. What I didn't have was a logical explanation for any of it. Yet, I got back to the brownstone at 4:30, which meant Wolfe was still upstairs with his orchids, and I had time to organize my notes before the evening conference. Fritz had left a plate of sandwiches in the kitchen, roast beef with his horseradish sauce that could wake the dead, and I did them justice while Diana settled on her rug with the satisfied air of a dog who'd done good work. At 6 o'clock sharp, I heard the elevator descend. Wolfe appeared in the office doorway with Caesar at his heels, surveyed the room to confirm I was present and breathing, then settled behind his desk with the usual orchestrated series of movements that got a seventh of a ton properly positioned. "Report," he said, reaching for the button that would summon Fritz with beer. I gave it to him straight. The crypt laboratory, the writing on the walls, the coins, Quinn's story about the organ, Diana's alert at the pew. I included dimensions, times, observations about Quinn's demeanor, and my assessment that the caretaker was genuinely frightened, not acting. Wolfe listened without interruption, his eyes half closed, fingers interlaced across his middle mound. When Fritz brought the beer, Wolfe poured with his usual precision, drank, and set the glass down with a soft click. "The laboratory equipment?" he said. "Chemical analysis, microscopy, reference materials on medieval artifacts?" Mr. Lockwood was authenticating something. That was my read. But authenticating what? Quinn said the church's valuables were sold off decades ago. Perhaps not all of them, or perhaps something was discovered during the renovation. He opened his eyes fully. The writing on the wall, he knows, seal it, hide everything, November 1st. That's next Friday, 8 days from now. And below it, in different handwriting, too late, when did Mr. Lockwood disappear? Sunday night, October 20th. So the second message was written after his disappearance, possibly by whoever took him. The timeline suggests urgency. Something was meant to be hidden by November 1st. Someone discovered this plan and acted to prevent it or to seize whatever was being hidden. Hollister? Perhaps. Or someone else who knew about Hollister and used that knowledge as misdirection. He drank beer thoughtfully. The coins are curious. Silver dollars from 1887, the year the church was built. Left deliberately as what? Messages, calling cards, evidence of time travel? I'm betting on messages. Nobody time travels to leave pocket change. Agreed. Someone is communicating through these coins, either to frighten or to inform. The question is, what do they signify? He reached for the phone. I want to speak with Father Driscoll, the retired priest. Arrange it for tomorrow morning if possible. I made the call. Father Driscoll answered on the third ring. A warm voice with the easy authority of someone who'd spent decades listening to confessions and dispensing wisdom. He agreed to come to the brownstone at 10 the next morning, and he sounded genuinely distressed about James Lockwood's disappearance. Good, Wolfe said when I reported success. Now call Mrs. Lockwood and ask her to provide us with her husband's research materials, the boxes Mr. Quinn mentioned. I want to see what Mr. Lockwood discovered about the church's history. Mrs. Lockwood answered immediately, as though she'd been sitting by the phone. She said she'd have the boxes delivered first thing in the morning. Her voice was strained, and I heard the exhaustion in it, the kind that comes from hope deferred too long. Anything else? I asked Wolfe after I hung up. Yes. Contact Saul and Fred. I want them to locate Raymond Hollister and establish his movements for the past 2 weeks. If his alibi for Sunday night is fabricated, I want to know. Also, have them investigate the other individuals connected to the restoration project, the art historian, Penelope Ashford, and the construction foreman, Marcus Webb. Financial records, personal history, anything that might suggest motive for murder or theft. Saul Panzer and Fred Durkin were our regular freelance operatives, the best in the business. Saul could find a needle in a haystack and then tell you the needle's life story. Fred was less subtle but equally thorough. I called them both, outlined the assignment, and promised bonus pay if they worked fast. By 7, arrangements were made and dinner was approaching. Wolfe was reading through Mrs. Lockwood's files with the focused intensity he brought to anything involving puzzles. I was updating my notes when the phone rang. It was Lon Cohen from the Gazette. Lon's an old friend who trades information the way other people trade baseball cards. Everything has value. Nothing is free. Archie, what's Wolfe's interest in St. Anselm's church? I should have known. Lon has sources everywhere, including apparently the NYPD. Why do you think Wolfe has any interest? Because I heard Detective Rowcliffe complaining about private detectives interfering with missing persons cases. He specifically mentioned the brownstone on West 35th Street. So, what's the story? Missing millionaire, possibly murdered. Haunted church, the usual. What do you know about St. Anselm's? Not much. Historic building, closed by the Archdiocese 5 years ago due to declining attendance and maintenance costs. Bought by James Lockwood for restoration. There were some protests from preservationists who thought the Archdiocese should have fought harder to keep it open, but nothing serious. Why? Is there a story? Is there? Maybe. What can you tell me about the church's history? Original construction? Founding families? Anything unusual? Give me an hour. I'll call you back. He did. At 8:15, just as we were finishing Fritz's duck with orange sauce, a masterpiece that deserved its own award ceremony. Okay, this is interesting, Lon said. St. Anselm's was built in 1887 by a consortium of wealthy Catholic families, Irish immigrants who'd made fortunes in railroads, shipping, and real estate. The church was meant to be their legacy, a monument to faith and prosperity. Construction cost over $300,000, a fortune at the time. Who were these families? The Quinns, the Hollisters, the Ashfords, the Webbs, and the Lockwoods. I felt something click into place. Say that again? Quinn, Hollister, Ashford, Webb, Lockwood, 5 founding families. They each contributed $60,000 to the construction. Their names are carved into the foundation stone. I've got a photograph from the Archdiocese archives. Want me to send it? Yes, immediately. The photograph came through on my email 2 minutes later. I printed it and took it to Wolfe, who was back in the office with coffee and a book on medieval reliquaries, one of the reference volumes from Mrs. Lockwood's files. He examined the photograph. The foundation stone was massive granite, carved with ornate text. St. Anselm's Church, built AD 1887. By the grace of God and the generosity of Patrick Quinn, Raymond Hollister, Psalm Nathaniel Ashford, Cornelius Webb, James Lockwood Safkrell. Well, I said, that's not a coincidence. No. Wolfe set down the photograph carefully. The current cast of characters are all descendants of the founding families. Bernard Quinn, the caretaker. Raymond Hollister, the imprisoned business partner. Penelope Ashford, the art historian. Marcus Webb, the construction foreman. And James Lockwood, the missing millionaire. 5 families, 5 suspects. Indeed. And the coins bearing the date 1887, the year these families came together to build the church, suggest the current crime is connected to that founding. Something from the past has reached forward to create murder in the present. Or someone's using the past as a smokescreen. Possibly. But the laboratory equipment in the crypt suggests Mr. Lockwood discovered something valuable, something worth authenticating, hiding and potentially killing for. Tomorrow, when Father Driscoll arrives, we will learn more about what these founding families might have hidden in their monument to God. Friday morning brought rain, the cold, persistent kind that makes October feel like a preview of winter. Father Michael Driscoll arrived at 10 sharp, shaking water from his umbrella in the vestibule, while Minerva and Apollo watched with professional interest from the office doorway. He was 70-something, compact and energetic, with white hair, sharp blue eyes, and the kind of face that had heard every human failing and still managed to believe in redemption. He wore civilian clothes, slacks, cardigan, priest's collar, and carried a worn leather briefcase that had probably been with him since Vatican II. I settled him in the red leather chair with coffee, Fritz's special blend, which could convert atheists, while Wolfe finished his morning mail. When Wolfe finally looked up, he gave Father Driscoll the brief nod that passed for a greeting. Father Driscoll, thank you for coming. I'm investigating the disappearance of James Lockwood from St. Anselm's Church. You were the last resident priest there. Tell me about the church and the families who built it. Father Driscoll sipped his coffee and nodded appreciatively. Excellent coffee. As for St. Anselm's, it's a tragic story, really. Built with such hope in 1887 and now abandoned, the neighborhood changed beyond recognition. The founding families meant well, but good intentions don't always produce good outcomes. Explain. The church was built during a period of great Irish immigration to New York. 5 families, newly wealthy, Catholic, ambitious, wanted to create something permanent, something that would last beyond their lifetimes. They succeeded architecturally, but the church always carried a certain shadow. What kind of shadow? I asked. Father Driscoll set down his coffee cup. Rumors. Nothing documented, you understand, but persistent stories about how the founding families acquired their wealth. Patrick Quinn supposedly controlled the longshoremen's union through violence and intimidation. Raymond Hollister Sr. ran illegal gambling operations. Nathaniel Ashford was accused of smuggling contraband through his shipping company. Cornelius Webb's construction company was known for bribing building inspectors and using substandard materials. And James Lockwood Sr. made his fortune in tenement real estate, slum housing that killed tenants through neglect. So the church was built with dirty money, I said. Built with money that had blood on it. Yes. The founding families saw the church as penance, a way to wash their hands of their sins. They filled it with expensive art, rare relics, gold and silver. The original inventory was extraordinary. Medieval manuscripts, chalices studded with gems, a reliquary supposedly containing bones of Saint Anselm himself. They wanted to buy their way into heaven. Wolfe leaned back in his chair. What happened to these treasures? Most were sold when the archdiocese ran short of funds in the 1960s and 70s. The church had declined, the neighborhood changed, the founding families died or moved away, attendance dropped. By the time I arrived in 1998, St. Anselm's was a shell. We had perhaps 20 regular parishioners, all elderly. The archdiocese kept us open out of nostalgia, but it was unsustainable. In 2020, they finally closed it. And then James Lockwood bought it. Yes, 3 years ago. He approached me during the closure proceedings, said he was descended from James Lockwood Sr., and wanted to restore the family legacy. He had plans, turn it into a museum, a cultural center, perhaps a concert hall. The organ alone was worth the investment, he said. He seemed genuinely devoted to the project. Did he mention searching for the original treasures? Father Driscoll paused. Not directly, but he asked many questions about the church's history, the founding families, what had happened to the artwork and relics. I told him what I knew. Most items had been sold through dealers and auctions, but he seemed convinced that some things might remain hidden in the building. Did he say why he thought that? He mentioned finding discrepancies in the archdiocese records, inventory lists that didn't match sales receipts, items that were listed as sold but had no documentation of actual buyers. He thought perhaps some of the more valuable pieces had been misappropriated, when stolen or hidden. During the Vatican II reforms, there was tremendous upheaval in the church. Some priests and bishops resisted the changes. It's possible that certain valuable items were concealed to prevent their sale, preserved for a time when the church would return to older traditions. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Who would have had the authority to hide such items? Any priest with access to the building and the trust of the archdiocese. But that was 60 years ago. Anyone involved would be dead by now. Not necessarily, I said. If someone knew where things were hidden and waited for the right moment, say, when the church was being restored by a descendant of the founding families, they might decide to retrieve them. Father Driscoll looked troubled. You think that's what happened? Someone came for hidden treasures, and Mr. Lockwood discovered them? It's a theory, Wolfe said. Father Driscoll, you gave Mr. Lockwood keys to the church. Did you give keys to anyone else? No, only him and Bernard Quinn have full access. Though, he hesitated. Though what? Several months ago, a man came to my residence in Queens. He said he was researching the church's history, writing a book about Gothic revival architecture in New York. He asked if I had any photographs, documents, or historical information I could share. I gave him copies of some old records, nothing sensitive, just construction documents, dedication ceremonies, that sort of thing. He seemed legitimate. Did he give you his name? Yes, Thomas Brennan. He left a business card, said he was a professor at Columbia. I made a note. Do you still have the card? Father Driscoll opened his briefcase and rummaged through papers. I believe so, yes, here. He handed me a business card. Thomas Brennan, Ph.D. Department of Art History. Columbia University. Did Professor Brennan ask about the church's valuables? Wolfe asked. He asked about the original furnishings and artwork. I told him what I knew, that most had been sold. He seemed disappointed, asked specifically about the reliquary containing St. Anselm's bones. I said it had been sold to a private collector in the 1970s, but I didn't know who. That's when he became very interested. Wanted to know if there were records of the sale, authentication documents, provenance. I said the archdiocese would have those records. When did this conversation occur? Last March, about 7 months ago. Wolfe's fingers drummed once on his desk, his equivalent of shouting Eureka. He looked at me. Archie, call Columbia University, confirm Professor Brennan's employment, and find out if he's actually writing a book about Gothic architecture. I made the call while Father Driscoll and Wolfe continued talking. The art history department secretary was helpful. She confirmed that Thomas Brennan was indeed on faculty and specialized in medieval religious art. However, when I asked about his current research, she said his primary project was a book about Byzantine iconography, not Gothic architecture. She offered to connect me to his office, but I declined. No point tipping him off if he was involved. I relayed this to Wolfe. So Professor Brennan lied about his research topic. Or, used a convenient fiction to extract information, Wolfe said. Father Driscoll described Professor Brennan's appearance. Mid-50s, I'd say. Tall, thin, graying hair, glasses, dressed like an academic tweed jacket, corduroy pants, spoke with the kind of precision academics develop when they spend too much time with footnotes. Did he have an accent? Now that you mention it, yes. Very slight, mostly covered, but I caught hints of it. Irish, I think. Like Bernard Quinn's, but fainter. Wolfe and I exchanged glances. Quinn had lived at the church for 30 years. If Professor Brennan was related to Bernard Quinn, or to Patrick Quinn, the founding family member, that would be another interesting connection. Father Driscoll, Wolfe said, I need you to do something. Call Professor Brennan today. Tell him you've been thinking about your conversation and you remembered something about the reliquary. See if he's interested in meeting. If he agrees, set the meeting for tomorrow, somewhere public, but don't mention my involvement or Mr. Lockwood's disappearance. You think Professor Brennan is involved in whatever happened to Mr. Lockwood? I think Professor Brennan asked very specific questions about very specific items at a very specific time. That suggests foreknowledge. Whether it also suggests guilt remains to be determined. Father Driscoll agreed to make the call, and I walked him to the door. As he was leaving, he turned back. Mr. Wolfe, I hope you find James. Despite everything, he seemed like a man trying to make amends for his family's past. That deserves something better than disappearing into darkness. I will find him, Father, though whether he's in darkness or has passed beyond it, I cannot yet say. After the priest left, Wolfe sat in silence for a full minute, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and regular. Then he opened his eyes and looked at me. This case is acquiring layers like sedimentary rock. 5 founding families, all with criminal pasts, building a church to expiate their sins, treasures hidden during Vatican II reforms, a descendant who discovers something worth hiding, an academic who lies about his research, a business partner with motive for revenge, and through it all, an organist who's been dead for 10 years allegedly playing Bach in the middle of the night. You think the ghost story is just cover? I think everything is cover, Archie. Superstition, family history, religious mystery, all of it designed to obscure a simple truth. Someone wanted something James Lockwood had found, and they were willing to kill to get it. So what's our next move? We wait for Saul and Fred to report on Hollister, Webb and Ashford. We examine Lockwood's research materials when they arrive, and we set a trap for Professor Brennan tomorrow. Somewhere in this accumulation of facts is a pattern. I merely need to see it. The phone rang. It was Saul Panzer. Archie, I've got something on Raymond Hollister. You're going to want to hear this. Saul Panzer has a voice like sandpaper on silk. Rough but somehow smooth. The kind of voice that makes you trust him even when he's telling you things you don't want to hear. He'd been on the Hollister investigation for less than 24 hours, and already he had results. Raymond Hollister was released from Sing Sing 6 weeks ago, Saul said. Served 12 years of a 20-year sentence for attempted murder and embezzlement. Model prisoner, took college courses, worked in the prison library, paroled to a halfway house in Newark Burkhouse, it's called. They've got him on a strict schedule, job training during the day, curfew at 8 p.m., regular drug tests, the works. So his alibi for Sunday night checks out, I said. According to the official records, yes, he signed in at 7:45 p.m. and didn't leave the building. The night manager confirms it. But here's the interesting part. The night manager is his cousin. Second cousin, actually, Margaret Hollister. She runs Burkhouse, has for 8 years. I glanced at Wolfe, who was listening on the extension, with the kind of focused attention he usually reserved for orchid auctions. Family connection means the alibi's questionable. Very questionable, Saul agreed. I talked to some of the other residents at Burkhouse. Off the record, naturally. 3 of them said Hollister has been gone several nights a week. Leaves around 10, comes back before dawn. The night manager looks the other way. Where does he go? That's where it gets interesting. I followed him last night. He took the bus into Manhattan, subway to 125th Street, then walked to West 131st, went straight to St. Anselm's Church. The office went very quiet. Even Minerva, dozing by the bookcase, seemed to pause her breathing. He went inside, Wolfe asked. Orchestrated mystery plot with multiple suspects and mounting tension. Great. The mystery is developing well. I need to build tension here. Hollister has been visiting the church, which confirms he's involved somehow. But I need to avoid making it too obvious. There should be multiple suspects with believable motives. Let me continue with Saul's report and then move into the investigation of the other suspects. He tried. Spent maybe 10 minutes on the back entrance, trying keys. Looked like he had at least 4 or 5 different keys, none of which worked. Eventually gave up and left. Walked around the building twice, looking up at the windows, checking the bell tower. Then he went to an all-night diner on Amsterdam Avenue and sat there until 3 a.m. with a notebook, writing. I couldn't get close enough to see what. Where is he now? Back at the halfway house. I've got Fred watching him today. If he moves, we'll know. Wolfe grunted. Did he appear to notice surveillance? No, sir. I was careful. And Hollister isn't trained. He's not checking for tails or taking precautions. Whatever he's doing, he thinks he's alone. What about his finances? That's another interesting piece. Hollister came out of prison with $800 in his prison account. 3 weeks ago, he deposited $15,000 in cash into a checking account at Chase. When I called the bank, I've got a friend there. She said he's made 2 more deposits since then, $10,000 and $12,000. All cash. $37,000 in 6 weeks. I said, someone's paying him. Or he's selling something, Saul said. Either way, an ex-con on parole shouldn't have that kind of money unless it's coming from somewhere illegal. Wolfe was silent for a moment, his eyes distant. Mr. Panzer, continue surveillance on Mr. Hollister. I want to know everywhere he goes, everyone he meets, and every penny he spends. If he returns to St. Anselm's, photograph him but do not interfere. Report immediately if he gains access to the building. Will do. One more thing. Fred checked out Marcus Webb, the construction foreman. He's got financial problems. His company, Webb Restoration, is 3 months behind on payroll and facing liens from suppliers. He owes about $200,000 to various creditors. Yet he continues to work on the church restoration. James Lockwood paid him in advance, $100,000 6 months ago to cover the next phase of work. Webb used half of it to pay debts, and the other half, nobody knows. It's just gone. Fred's trying to trace it. Excellent work. Continue. After Saul hung up, Wolfe sat motionless, his eyes focused on something beyond the office walls, or perhaps on something inside his mind, a pattern forming from disparate facts. Archie, your analysis. I flipped through my notes. Hollister has motive. Lockwood destroyed his life and stole from their company. He's got cash from unknown sources, and he's sneaking out of the halfway house to visit the church where Lockwood disappeared. That makes him suspect number 1. But Webb also has motive. He's drowning in debt, and $50,000 of Lockwood's money is missing. That makes him suspect number 2. And the others? Penelope Ashford, the art historian, hasn't shown up on Fred's radar yet. No financial problems, no obvious connection to Hollister or Webb, no reason to want Lockwood dead, unless she knows something about whatever Lockwood found in the crypt. Father Driscoll seems clean, though he did give information to Professor Brennan. Speaking of whom, Brennan lied about his research and asked specific questions about the reliquary. That's suspicious. And Bernard Quinn, hardest to read. He's been at the church 30 years, descended from one of the founding families, genuinely frightened by the haunting phenomena. Either he's an excellent actor, or he's telling the truth about the organ playing itself. Wolfe opened his eyes fully. The organ cannot play itself, Archie. It is a mechanical instrument requiring physical manipulation of keys and stops. Therefore, someone played it. The question is, who and why? Quinn could be lying about seeing it play with nobody there. Possible. Or he could have been positioned such that he couldn't see the organist, blinded by darkness or angle. Or, he paused. Or there is a mechanism we haven't yet discovered that allows remote operation. You said there was no electronic equipment. I said, you said there was no visible electronic equipment. That is not the same as saying none exists. Modern technology can be miniaturized and concealed. What appears to be a mechanical organ could have been modified with solenoids and servo motors invisible to casual inspection. You want me to go back and check? No. I want you to bring Bernard Quinn here tomorrow morning. Also Penelope Ashford and Marcus Webb. I will question them together and separately. Confrontation often reveals what gentle inquiry conceals. The doorbell rang. Through the bulletproof glass panel, I could see a delivery truck and a driver with a dolly loaded with boxes. That'll be Lockwood's research materials, I said. It was. 3 large file boxes and 2 plastic storage bins full of documents, photographs, notebooks, and books. The driver needed 2 trips to get everything into the front room. I signed for them and started the laborious process of sorting. The boxes contained exactly what Father Driscoll had described: archdiocese records, construction documents, photographs of St. Anselm's from 1887 to present, newspaper clippings about the founding families, genealogical research tracing the 5 family lines, and James Lockwood's personal notebooks chronicling his investigation into the church's history and hidden treasures. I spent the next 3 hours going through it all, while Wolfe read over my shoulder, occasionally grunting or muttering "pa" when something displeased him. By 6 p.m., when Fritz announced dinner, I had a reasonable understanding of what James Lockwood had been investigating. Over Fritz's pot roast, which could have negotiated peace treaties, I briefed Wolfe on the key findings. Lockwood was obsessed with the reliquary, supposedly containing St. Anselm's bones. According to Archdiocese records, it was sold to a private collector in 1974 for $12,000. But Lockwood found discrepancies. The sales receipt lists the buyer as anonymous, via intermediary, which is unusual. Most collectors want documentation of provenance for authentication. An anonymous purchase suggests the buyer didn't want records, or the sale never actually occurred, Wolfe said. Exactly, Lockwood wrote in his notebook. Reliquary sale likely fabricated, no documentation of buyer, no transport records, no subsequent appearance at auction or in private collections. Conclusion, still in church, hidden during Vatican II reforms. He became convinced the reliquary was somewhere in the building, probably in the crypt or the walls. What makes this reliquary so valuable? According to Lockwood's research, it's a 13th century French Gothic design, gold and silver with enamel work and precious stones. The bones themselves are supposedly authenticated. St. Anselm of Canterbury, who died in 1109. If genuine, the reliquary could be worth over $1 million to the right collector. Maybe more to someone who values the religious significance. Wolfe cut his pot roast with surgical precision. And if someone knew Lockwood was close to finding it, they'd want to get there first, or stop him from finding it, or take it from him after he found it. The laboratory equipment in the crypt suggests he did find it. He was authenticating the bones, testing their age, verifying provenance. The question is, what happened next? We finished dinner in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. After dessert, Fritz's apple tart with cinnamon ice cream, we returned to the office where I continued working through Lockwood's papers while Wolfe read a book on medieval saints and relics. The Dobermans had settled into their evening positions. Caesar near Wolfe's desk, Minerva and Diana by the bookshelves, Mars and Apollo guarding the door. At 8:30 the phone rang. It was Fred Durkin. "Archie, you're going to want to hear this. Hollister just left the halfway house again 10 minutes ago, climbed out a back window. I'm following him on foot. He's heading toward the Port Authority. Stay on him. Call me when you know where he's going." 30 minutes later, Fred called back. He took a bus. Not toward Manhattan, toward Westchester. I'm on the same bus, 3 rows back. He's got a duffel bag with him. Can't tell what's in it, but it looks heavy. "Where in Westchester?" "Bus is heading to Yonkers. I'll call you when we get there." Wolfe had been listening on the extension. When Fred hung up, Wolfe said, "Mr. Hollister is retrieving something or delivering something. The duffel bag suggests physical objects rather than information. Follow him to ground, Archie. Take Mars, and be armed." I keep a Marley 38 in the safe for occasions like this. I loaded it, put on my shoulder holster, grabbed my coat, and collected Mars from his rug. He rose immediately, sensing the change in atmosphere, the tension that said work was about to become dangerous. "Fritz," I called, "Mars and I are going to Yonkers. Save some tart for us." "Of course," Fritz said, appearing from the kitchen. "And Archie, be careful. Churches are not the only things that are haunted." I had no idea what he meant by that, and I didn't have time to ask. The drive to Yonkers took 45 minutes through light traffic, with Fred calling every few miles to update Hollister's position. By the time I crossed the city line, Fred had tracked him to an industrial area near the Hudson River. Warehouses, auto repair shops, and the kind of businesses that don't advertise their services. He went into a storage facility, Fred said. U-Lock Storage, on Riverdale Avenue. Big place, Maybe 200 units. He used a key card to get through the gate. I'm in the parking lot across the street. Where are you? 2 minutes away. I pulled into the lot beside Fred's car, a battered Chevy that blended into any neighborhood like urban camouflage. Fred climbed into my passenger seat while Mars settled in the back, alert and watchful. He's been inside for 15 minutes, Fred said. Haven't seen anyone else go in or come out. The facility has security cameras, but the lighting's bad. Easy enough to avoid them if you know what you're doing. Think he's meeting someone. Could be, or picking something up. That duffel bag was empty when he went in. I could tell by the way he carried it. We waited. The October night was cold and clear. The kind of night where sounds carry and everything seems sharper than usual. Mars shifted occasionally, his attention fixed on the storage facility entrance. At 9:45, Hollister emerged. The duffel bag was no longer empty. He carried it with both hands, walking carefully like someone transporting fragile cargo. He crossed the parking lot to a bus stop, checked his watch, and sat on the bench. What do we do? Fred asked. Follow him back? I considered. No, I want to see what's in that storage unit. Can you handle Hollister alone? Sure, I'll stick with him, see where he goes. Call me immediately if he heads anywhere except back to the halfway house. Fred left in his Chevy. I waited until the bus arrived and departed with Hollister aboard. Then I got out of my car with Mars and approached the storage facility's gate. It was 10 feet of chain link with razor wire on top and a card reader that controlled access. Beyond it, rows of identical garage-style units stretched into the darkness, each with its own rolling door and padlock. I could have picked the gate lock or climbed the fence, but both would take time and attract attention. Instead, I walked around the perimeter until I found what I was looking for, a section where the fence met the tree line, and some enterprising person had cut a hole in the chain link, large enough for a determined adult to squeeze through. Mars went through first, silent and efficient. I followed, tearing my coat sleeve only slightly in the process. On the other side, we moved along the rows of units, staying in shadows, avoiding the security cameras mounted at regular intervals. The problem was figuring out which unit was Hollister's. There were maybe 200 of them, all identical except for the numbers painted on their doors. I could have spent all night checking padlocks for signs of recent use, but Mars solved the problem for me. He stopped at Unit 147, sniffed the door carefully, then sat and looked at me with his "I found it" expression. Dogs don't lie. The padlock was new, brass, heavy duty, the kind that requires bolt cutters or a key. I had neither. But what I did have was a small pry bar that lives in my coat pocket for emergencies, and more importantly, I had the element of surprise. No one expected anyone to be here at 10 p.m. on a Friday night. I worked the pry bar into the gap between the door and frame, found the locking mechanism, and applied pressure. The door was designed to resist pulling but not leverage from the inside. After 2 minutes of careful work, something inside bent, and the door rolled up 6 inches. Mars slipped through immediately. I followed, clicking on my flashlight. The storage unit was 10 by 10, climate-controlled and mostly empty, except for 3 items. A wooden crate, approximately 3 feet long, sitting on a furniture dolly. A stack of old leather-bound ledgers piled neatly against one wall, and hanging on the back wall, carefully wrapped in acid-free tissue paper, a medieval reliquary. Even through the tissue paper, I could see it was extraordinary. Gold framework with silver filigree, enamel panels depicting scenes from religious texts, jewels that caught my flashlight beam and threw back red, blue, and green fire. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the kind of work that takes years to complete and centuries to appreciate. I photographed everything with my phone. The reliquary, the crate, the ledgers, the unit number, every angle I could manage. Mars stayed by the door, ears forward, alert for anyone approaching, but the facility remained silent. I examined the wooden crate. It was old but sturdy, stamped with customs marks from the 1970s and an address in New York, St. Anselm's Church, 275 West 131st Street, New York, NY. So the reliquary had been moved from the church sometime in the 70s, right when the archdiocese claimed it was sold. The ledgers were more interesting. I opened one carefully. The pages were covered in handwriting, neat, precise, clerical script. Account books from St. Anselm's Church. dating from 1960 through 1975. I flipped through the pages, and certain entries leapt out. Me 1965. Removed following items from vault per Father O'Brien's instructions. Reliquary, St. Anselm, chalice, 14th C, manuscripts, 6 volumes, stored at secure location pending restoration. September 1968. Father O'Brien departed. No forwarding address. Items remain in storage. January 1974. Archdiocese requested inventory. Listed items as sold to private collector per Father O'Brien's notation. Paperwork filed. Father O'Brien. I photographed the relevant pages, then carefully replaced the ledgers exactly as I'd found them. Whoever had this storage unit, and I was betting it wasn't just Hollister, would notice if things were disturbed. I took one last look at the reliquary. Even wrapped in tissue paper, it was breathtaking. If James Lockwood had been searching for this and found evidence of its location, that would be motive enough for murder. $1 million was a lot of money. Enough to kill for, certainly enough to kidnap for. Mars and I slipped out of the unit the way we'd come. I let the door fall back to its damaged position. It would look like vandalism rather than a professional entry. Then we made our way back to the fence, through the hole, and to my car. My phone buzzed. Fred. Hollister's back at the halfway house, went in through the same window he left from. The duffel bag's with him still full. He's in his room now with the door closed. Good work. I'm heading back to Manhattan. I'll fill you in tomorrow. The drive back gave me time to think. Father O'Brien had removed the reliquary and other valuable items from St. Anselm's in 1965, right in the middle of the Vatican II reforms, when churches were selling off treasures to modernize. He'd stored them somewhere secure, probably this storage facility, or maybe somewhere else first. Then he'd left the priesthood without telling anyone where the items were hidden. But someone knew. Someone had access to the storage unit. And that someone was paying Hollister to do what? Transport the reliquary, sell it, guard it. Or had Hollister found the storage unit himself, discovered his family's legacy locked away, and decided to reclaim it? I got back to the brownstone at 11:30. Wolfe was still in the office, reading. He looked up when I entered, noted my expression, and said, "Report." I gave him everything. The storage unit, the reliquary, the ledgers, Father O'Brien's name, the customs crate. I showed him the photographs on my phone. He studied them with the intensity he usually reserved for rare orchids. "Father O'Brien," he said finally. "We must locate him. Archie, call Father Driscoll. Wake him if necessary. I need to know what happened to Father O'Brien after he left St. Anselm's in 19... I made the call. Father Driscoll answered on the 5th ring, sounding groggy but alert once I explained the urgency. "Father Patrick O'Brien? I know of him. He was before my time, but the stories remained. Brilliant man, scholar, expert in medieval religious art. He left the priesthood in 1968 under unclear circumstances. Some said he'd lost his faith. Others said he'd been forced out for disagreeing with the Vatican II reforms. I don't know what happened to him after that. Could he still be alive? He'd be in his 90s, but it's possible. Why do you ask?"
"Because he's the key to this entire case. Thank you, Father. Go back to sleep."
I hung up and looked at Wolfe, tracking down a 90-year-old ex-priest who disappeared 57 years ago. That should be simple. Nothing is simple, Archie, but everything is knowable. Call Saul in the morning, have him search records, Social Security, Medicare, property records, anything that might trace Father O'Brien's movements after 90. Also have him research whether O'Brien has any living relatives. You think O'Brien is behind this? I think Father O'Brien stole valuable church property in 1965, hid it for reasons we don't yet understand, and someone has recently discovered where he hid it. That person is now attempting to retrieve it, using Hollister as an intermediary, perhaps, or competing with him for possession. The question is, does this have anything to do with James Lockwood's disappearance? Has to, I said. Lockwood was searching for the reliquary. He had a laboratory set up in the crypt to authenticate artifacts. If he found evidence of where the reliquary was hidden, then whoever wanted the reliquary would need to silence him before he could claim it or report it to authorities. Wolfe finished his beer. Tomorrow's interrogations should prove illuminating. I want Quinn, Ashford and Webb here by 10 a.m. Also confirm Father Driscoll's meeting with Professor Brennan. If Brennan is involved, That confrontation will reveal it. What about Hollister? Leave him to Saul and Fred for now. He's a player, but I don't yet know if he's a principal or merely a pawn. When I understand the full pattern, we'll bring him in. I headed upstairs, exhausted but too wired to sleep immediately. Mars accompanied me, settling on the rug beside my bed with a contented sigh. Through my window I could see the city lights spreading in all directions. Millions of lives, millions of secrets, and somewhere among them, the truth about James Lockwood. Tomorrow would bring answers, or more questions. With Wolfe, it was hard to tell which would arrive first. Saturday morning brought sunshine, surprising for late October, as though the universe had decided to offer a brief reprieve from autumn's gloom before November arrived, to make everything grey and cold. I was at my desk by 8:30, organizing notes and preparing for the day's interrogations. Wolfe came down from the plant rooms at 9 on the dot, glanced at the list of scheduled visitors, and grunted his approval. Fritz brought coffee and sweet rolls, his specialty, with cinnamon and raisins, and we settled in to review strategy. Bernard Quinn arrives first, Wolfe said. Alone. I want to assess his truthfulness before introducing him to the others. He's been at the church 30 years. If anyone knows its secrets, it's him. You think he's lying about the haunting? I think he's frightened, which means either he believes what he's telling us, or he's an exceptional actor. Today will determine which. Quinn arrived at 9:30 sharp, looking even more worn than he had at the church. He dressed in his best clothes, dark suit that had seen better decades, white shirt, narrow tie, and carried a battered fedora that he clutched like a shield. Apollo and Diana greeted him at the door, and he paused to scratch their ears with the automatic gentleness of someone who loved animals. I settled him in the red leather chair with coffee. He thanked Fritz with the elaborate courtesy of his generation, then turned his attention to Wolfe with an expression that was equal parts hope and dread. Mr. Quinn, Wolfe began, I've been to St. Anselm's. I've seen the laboratory in the crypt, the writing on the walls, the security Mr. Lockwood installed. I've also learned that you are descended from Patrick Quinn, one of the church's founding families. Tell me about your grandfather. Quinn's hands tightened on his coffee cup. I never knew him. He died in 1932, long before I was born. My father didn't speak of him much. There was shame in the family about how Patrick Quinn made his money. Violence and corruption, as I understand it. Building the church was his attempt at redemption. And the other founding families, the Hollisters, Ashfords, Webbs, Lockwoods. Same story, I believe. All of them sought absolution through their gift to God. But money tainted with sin doesn't wash clean just because you use it to buy stained glass. Did your family remain connected to the church? My father served as caretaker before me. When he died in 1985. I took over. It seemed like the right thing to do, serving the church, honoring God, perhaps balancing the scales my grandfather had tipped toward evil. I've given my life to St. Anselm's, Mr. Wolfe. 30 years of maintaining it, protecting it, keeping the faith even when everyone else abandoned it. Tell me about Father Patrick O'Brien. Quinn's expression shifted to surprise. How do you know that name? Answer the question. Father O'Brien was before my time, but my father knew him, said he was the finest priest St. Anselm's ever had. Learned, devoted, principled. When Vatican II came and the church began selling off treasures to fund reforms, Father O'Brien opposed it. He believed the sacred objects were gifts to God that shouldn't be liquidated for earthly purposes. There was a great argument with the archdiocese. Eventually, Father O'Brien left, walked away from the priesthood entirely. Did your father ever mention what happened to the church's valuables? Quinn hesitated. My father said some items were sold, others disappeared. He thought Father O'Brien might have hidden them, but he never said so explicitly. It was just a feeling he had. Mr. Quinn, did your father tell you where Father O'Brien might have hidden these items? No, but another pause. Shortly before my father died, he gave me a key, said it belonged to Father O'Brien. And if anyone ever came looking for what was hidden, I should remember that family obligations ran deeper than church obligations. I didn't understand what he meant.
Do you still have this key?
Yes. Quinn reached into his pocket and placed a small brass key on Wolfe's desk. It was old, worn smooth by handling, with a number stamped into the head, 147, the storage unit. Wolfe picked up the key and examined it. Mr. Quinn, Why didn't you mention this key to Mrs. Lockwood or to the police? Because I didn't think it was relevant. It's just an old key my father gave me. I never knew what it opened. I still don't. It opens a storage unit in Yonkers containing a medieval reliquary worth over $1 million. A reliquary that Father O'Brien removed from St. Anselm's in 1965 and hid for reasons unknown. Your father knew about it. I believe he was protecting Father O'Brien's secret. Quinn's face went pale. $1 million? My God. I swear I never knew what that key was for. My father said it was important, but he never explained. Did James Lockwood ever ask you about Father O'Brien or missing artifacts? Yes, many times. I told him what little I knew, that Father O'Brien had been a scholar of medieval art, that some items had disappeared during his tenure, that the archdiocese records were incomplete. Mr. Lockwood became obsessed with finding what was missing. He spent months researching, following leads. He said if he could find the original treasures and restore them to the church, it would complete his family's legacy. Did you tell him about the key? No. Quinn's voice rose slightly. I didn't connect it to anything. It was just something my father gave me, a keepsake. How was I supposed to know? Wolfe studied him for a long moment. Mr. Quinn, did Raymond Hollister ever visit the church? Not while I was awake, but someone has been trying to get in at night. I've heard them at the doors, testing locks. I assumed it was vandals or homeless people. Now I wonder. Thank you, Mr. Quinn. Please wait in the front room. I have other questions, but first I need to speak with the remaining suspects. I escorted Quinn to the front room, where Mars took up guard position. When I returned, Wolfe was examining the key with a magnifying glass. Well, I said, Mr. Quinn is telling the truth, or at least he believes he's telling the truth. His surprise at learning the key's purpose was genuine, but his father knew, which means Patrick Quinn's son was part of Father O'Brien's conspiracy, protecting stolen church property for reasons that died with him. Why would Quinn's father protect stolen relics? Family loyalty to the founding members? Possibly. Or perhaps he believed, as Father O'Brien did, that the sacred objects shouldn't be sold. Or perhaps he was being paid to keep silent. We need more information. The doorbell rang. Penelope Ashford had arrived. She was exactly what you'd expect from an art historian, with 3 degrees and a specialty in medieval religious artifacts. 50s, elegant, grey-haired, dressed in a navy suit that cost more than my car. She carried a leather portfolio and an air of academic authority that filled the room like expensive perfume. Wolfe gave her the brief assessment he reserved for people who might be intelligent, then gestured to the red leather chair. Miss Ashford, please sit. You were hired by James Lockwood to authenticate church artifacts. What did you find? Very little, unfortunately. Her voice was crisp, educated, with the slight British accent that comes from too many years at Oxford or Cambridge. Most of St. Anselm's original treasures were sold decades ago. What remains is architecturally significant, but not particularly valuable, stained glass that's lovely but not museum quality, stone carvings that are competent but not extraordinary. Mr. Lockwood was disappointed. Did he tell you what he was searching for? He mentioned a reliquary. Said the archdiocese records indicated it was sold in 1974, but he believed it might still be in the building, hidden somewhere. He asked me to research its provenance and authentication. And I found extensive documentation. The reliquary is French Gothic, circa 1240, commissioned for Canterbury Cathedral. It allegedly contains bone fragments of St. Anselm of Canterbury. If genuine, it's extraordinarily valuable, both monetarily and historically. The craftsmanship alone is remarkable. Did you locate this reliquary? She hesitated. No, but I found something interesting in the Archdiocese archives. The 1974 sale documentation is clearly fabricated. The buyer's signature doesn't match any handwriting samples in the church records, and the payment method was listed as cash, which is highly unusual for a $12,000 transaction. Someone created false paperwork to make it appear the reliquary was sold when it wasn't. Father O'Brien? Her eyes widened slightly. You know about Father O'Brien? Yes, I believe he arranged the false sale. He was in charge of the church's inventory during that period. He would have had both access and motivation. What motivation? Preservation. Father O'Brien was a traditionalist who opposed Vatican II reforms. When the archdiocese began selling off treasures to fund modernization, he would have seen it as sacrilege. Hiding the most valuable items would have been his way of protecting them. Mrs. Ashford, are you descended from Nathaniel Ashford, one of the founding families? Another pause. Yes, he was my great-great-grandfather. But I didn't know about the family connection when James hired me. It was pure coincidence. I don't believe in coincidence, madam. 5 founding families and descendants of all 5 are involved in the current situation. Quinn the caretaker, you the art historian, Webb the construction foreman, Hollister the ex-convict, and Lockwood himself. That suggests design, not chance. She leaned forward slightly. Mr. Wolfe, I'm a professional. I accepted James's commission because it was an interesting project. My family's historical connection to the church is irrelevant to my work. Perhaps you wanted access to the building to search for the reliquary yourself. $1 million artifact would solve many problems, wouldn't it? Are you accusing me of something? I'm suggesting that every person connected to this case has both means and potential motive. Until I determine which one actually took action, all are suspect. She stood. I've answered your questions honestly. If you have evidence that I've done anything wrong, present it. Otherwise, I have better things to do than be insulted. Sit down, Miss Ashford. Wolfe's voice didn't rise, but it carried weight like a judge's gavel. You will leave when I dismiss you, not before. Now tell me, when did you last see James Lockwood? She sat reluctantly. 2 weeks ago. He called me to the church, showed me the crypt laboratory, said he'd found something extraordinary. He wouldn't tell me what, said he needed a few more days to verify it. Then he'd show me. And then, nothing. He stopped returning my calls. I went to the church several times, but Bernard Quinn said James wasn't available. I assumed he was busy with the renovation. Then Mrs. Lockwood called and said he'd disappeared. That's when I realized something was terribly wrong. What do you think happened to him? I think he found the reliquary, and I think someone killed him for it. Who? Raymond Hollister. He spent 12 years in prison because of James. That's motive enough. Or perhaps Marcus Webb. James mentioned that Webb was having financial problems and had asked for more money. James refused. Webb has access to the entire building. He could have... She trailed off. Could have what? Could have surprised James in the crypt, hit him, hidden the body somewhere in the renovation debris. The church has dozens of closed-off areas, spaces that haven't been opened in decades. A body could be concealed there for years without discovery. It was a grim thought, but a practical one. I made a note to search the closed sections of the church more thoroughly. Wolfe dismissed her to the front room, and we waited for Marcus Webb. Webb arrived 20 minutes late, which told me something about his character before he even opened his mouth. He was 40s, stocky, with the kind of build that comes from decades of physical labor. His hands were scarred and calloused, his face weathered by sun and wind. He wore work clothes, jeans, boots, flannel shirt, and looked uncomfortable in the brownstone's elegant surroundings. Wolfe didn't offer preliminaries. Mr. Webb, where were you Sunday night, October 20th, between the hours of 10 p.m. and 2 a.m.? Webb's expression hardened. Am I a suspect? Everyone is a suspect until they're eliminated. Answer the question. Home, watching TV, alone, no alibi except my word. You're descended from Cornelius Webb, one of St. Anselm's founding families. Yeah, so what? My great-great-grandfather built the church. That doesn't make me responsible for what happens there now. But you are responsible for the renovation work. James Lockwood paid you $100,000 6 months ago. Where is that money? Webb's jaw tightened. I paid my crew, bought materials, covered expenses, construction costs money. Archie? I consulted my notes. Fred Durkin checked with your suppliers. You've made payments totaling about $30,000 in the past 6 months. Your crew is owed 3 months of back wages, roughly $20,000. That leaves $50,000 unaccounted for. I had debts, Webb said flatly. Business debts, personal debts. I used some of Lockwood's money to keep my company from going under. I was going to pay it back. How? Wolfe asked. Your company is insolvent. You have no realistic prospect of repayment. Yet you accepted money from Mr. Lockwood under false pretenses. That's fraud, Mr. Webb. It's also motive for murder if he discovered your deception. I didn't kill him. Then where is he? How should I know? He disappeared Sunday night. I was home, like I said. Look, Lockwood was obsessed with that church. He spent hours in the crypt, going through walls, checking foundations, searching for something. He wouldn't tell me what, said it was private. I figured he was just eccentric. Rich people have weird hobbies. Did you ever see him with a reliquary? Webb blinked. A what? A golden religious artifact, approximately this size. Wolfe gestured dimensions with his hands. No, never. Is that what he was looking for? Possibly. Mr. Webb, did you know Father Patrick O'Brien? No. Who's that? Wolfe studied him. Webb's confusion seemed genuine. Either he was an excellent liar, or he truly didn't know about Father O'Brien or the hidden treasures. One more question. Wolfe said, have you seen Raymond Hollister at the church? Hollister? The guy who shot Lockwood 12 years ago? No. Why would he be there? That's what I intend to discover. You may wait in the front room with the others. Archie will call you when I'm ready. After Webb left, Wolfe sat in silence for a moment, then said, 3 suspects, 3 different stories, and yet I sense they're all telling partial truths. Quinn knew about the key, but not its purpose. Ashford knew about the reliquary, but claims not to have found it. Webb knew about Lockwood's obsession, but not the object of that obsession. Someone is lying by omission. Or they're all lying by omission, I said. Each one knows more than they're telling, but not enough to see the whole picture. Precisely, which means the key figure, the one who knows everything, is still missing. Either James Lockwood, Raymond Hollister, or Father Patrick O'Brien. We need to find at least one of them. The phone rang. It was Saul. Mr. Wolfe, I found Father O'Brien. Saul Panzer's talent for finding people who don't want to be found borders on the supernatural. Give him a name and 12 hours, and he'll produce an address, a phone number, and probably the subject's social security number and favorite breakfast cereal. Father O'Brien is alive, Saul said over the phone, 93 years old, living in a nursing home in Riverdale, St. Benedict's Senior Care. I talked to the administrator. He's been there for 8 years, pays his bills on time, keeps to himself. Full name, Patrick Joseph O'Brien. Left the priesthood in 1968. Worked as a librarian at Columbia University until he retired in 1995. No criminal record, no scandals, just a quiet life after leaving the church. Wolfe leaned forward slightly, his equivalent of jumping out of his chair. Can he receive visitors? According to the administrator, yes. He's physically frail, but mentally sharp. Spends most of his time reading theology and medieval history. I told them we'd be coming this afternoon to discuss St. Anselm's church. The administrator will notify him. Excellent. Archie and I will visit him at 2 o'clock. Continue surveillance on Hollister. I suspect his movements will become more urgent as November 1st approaches. After Saul hung up, I looked at Wolfe. You're leaving the brownstone? Again? That's twice in 1 week. Should I check the calendar for apocalyptic signs? Phooey. This case requires direct confrontation. Father O'Brien is the linchpin. He knows what happened to the reliquary, why he hid it, and possibly what has become of James Lockwood. Such information cannot be extracted over the telephone. What about the 3 suspects in the front room? Send them home. Tell them to remain available for further questioning. We'll deal with them after we've spoken to Father O'Brien. I dismissed Quinn, Ashford and Webb with instructions to stay reachable. They left separately, each looking troubled in different ways. Quinn frightened, Ashford angry, Webb sullen. Mars escorted them to the door one by one, his professional demeanor suggesting he wouldn't mind if one of them turned out to be guilty and required restraint. At 1:30, Wolfe descended from his post-lunch session with the Orchids, dressed in his best brown suit and yellow shirt. I brought the car around, the sedan we keep for occasions when Wolfe can't avoid leaving his sanctuary. Caesar came with us, settling into the back seat beside Wolfe with the proprietary air of a bodyguard who takes his duties seriously. The drive to Riverdale took 40 minutes. St. Benedict's Senior Care was a well-maintained facility overlooking the Hudson River. Red brick, white trim, gardens that probably looked spectacular in spring. Inside, it smelled like every nursing home. Antiseptic, flowers, and the faint underlying scent of age and decline. The administrator, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Patel, met us in the lobby. Father O'Brien is expecting you in his room. 3rd floor, room 312. He's quite excited. He doesn't get many visitors. We took the elevator. Caesar stayed close to Wolfe, alert but calm. On the third floor we found room 312 at the end of a quiet corridor lined with watercolor paintings of pastoral scenes. I knocked. A voice inside said, "Come in." Father Patrick O'Brien sat in a wheelchair near the window, a blanket across his lap, an open book on the side table beside him. He was ancient, skin like parchment, white hair thin as mist, hands gnarled with arthritis. But his eyes were clear and sharp, burning with the kind of intelligence that doesn't dim with age. "Mr. Wolfe, I presume." His voice was thin but steady. "Please sit. And your associate?" "Archie Goodwin," I said, shaking his hand carefully. "And this is Caesar." Father O'Brien's face lit up at the sight of the Doberman. A magnificent creature. I had dogs when I was young, before the priesthood, before everything changed. "What's his temperament?" "Protective but gentle with friends," Wolfe said, settling into the room's single armchair with the usual engineering challenge. Caesar positioned himself between Wolfe and the door, watchful. "Shall we dispense with pleasantries?" Father O'Brien said. "You're here about St. Anselm's church, the reliquary, and whatever has happened to bring these old secrets back into the light. Ask your questions. At my age, there's no point in evasion." Wolfe studied him for a moment. "In 1965, you removed valuable artifacts from St. Anselm's, including a medieval reliquary containing the bones of St. Anselm of Canterbury. You hid them in a storage facility in Yonkers. In 1974, you created false documentation indicating the items had been sold to a private collector. You then left the priesthood and disappeared into secular life. Why?" Father O'Brien smiled, a sad, worn expression. "You've done your research. Yes, I took the reliquary and other items. I removed them because the Archdiocese was selling our sacred heritage to fund renovations. I considered blasphemous. Vatican II was destroying everything beautiful about the church. Latin Mass gone, sacred music replaced with guitars, centuries of tradition discarded for modern convenience. I couldn't allow our most precious relics to be auctioned off like yard sale items. So you stole them. I preserved them. There's a difference. The law disagrees. The law is concerned with property rights. I was concerned with sacrilege." He shifted in his wheelchair, his hands trembling slightly. "The reliquary was extraordinary. Not just valuable, but holy. It contained actual bone fragments of St. Anselm, authenticated by the church in 1240. To sell it to some wealthy collector who'd display it in a private vault was unthinkable. So I removed it, along with several other items, and stored them safely until the church came to its senses." "But the church never came to its senses, as you define it," Wolfe said. "So you maintained your theft indefinitely." "I maintained my guardianship, yes. I paid for the storage facility from my library salary. I visited occasionally to ensure everything remained secure. I told no one, except one person I trusted absolutely." "Who?" "Joseph Quinn, Bernard Quinn's father. He was the caretaker at St. Anselm's, and he shared my traditional views. When I left the priesthood in 1968, I gave him a key to the storage unit and asked him to protect the secret. If anything happened to me, the key would pass to his son, and eventually the items could be returned to the church if the church ever deserved them again." "Did Joseph Quinn know what was in the storage unit?" "Yes. I told him everything. He agreed with my decision. The founding families had created St. Anselm's as a monument to God, and their descendants had a duty to preserve that monument, even from the church itself," I said. "Bernard Quinn has that key now. His father gave it to him before he died, but Bernard didn't know what it opened until today." Father O'Brien nodded. "Joseph told me he wouldn't burden his son with the full truth. Better to let Bernard remain innocent. The boy was devout, honest, not suited for conspiracy." "Father O'Brien," Wolfe said, 3 weeks ago, James Lockwood, a descendant of one of the founding families, received a threatening letter telling him to come to the church at midnight, or everyone will know what you are. Do you know anything about that letter?" The old priest's expression changed. Surprise, then concern. "No, I sent no letter. James Lockwood, I know the name. His great-great-grandfather was James Lockwood Sr., one of the founders. Is James in trouble?" "He's missing. Disappeared from the church on October 20th. We believe he discovered the existence of your hidden reliquary and was attempting to locate it when someone intervened, possibly to steal it, possibly to silence him. Father O'Brien's hands clenched on his blanket. My God, I never intended. I only wanted to preserve sacred objects. If someone has been hurt because of my actions. Did you tell anyone else about the storage unit? No, only Joseph Quinn knew. I've kept the secret for 57 years. Someone else knows, Wolfe said flatly. Raymond Hollister, another descendant, recently released from prison, has been visiting the storage unit regularly. He removed the reliquary 2 nights ago, and someone calling himself Professor Thomas Brennan from Columbia has been asking questions about the church's missing treasures. Father O'Brien went very still. Thomas Brennan, that was my mother's maiden name. I sometimes used it when I didn't want to be identified as Father O'Brien. You're Professor Brennan? No, I never claimed that title, but someone who knew my history might have adopted it to gain access to information about the church. Who would know your mother's maiden name? Anyone who researched my background. It's in the Archdiocese records. My full name is Patrick Joseph Brennan O'Brien. I was named for both my parents' families. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, his thinking pose. When he opened them again, he looked at me. Archie, call Saul. Have him find Professor Thomas Brennan at Columbia immediately. Get a photograph. Then check whether Raymond Hollister has any connection to the Columbia faculty or staff. I made the calls in the hallway while Wolfe continued questioning Father O'Brien. Saul answered immediately and said he'd have information within an hour. When I returned to the room, Father O'Brien was saying, "And if James Lockwood has been harmed, I bear responsibility. My attempt to preserve the sacred has led to violence. That's the opposite of what I intended." Intentions are philosophically interesting, but practically irrelevant, Wolfe said. What matters now is locating Mr. Lockwood and preventing further harm. Father O'Brien, is there anything else about the storage unit or the reliquary that might be relevant? Only this. The reliquary is more valuable than most people realize. It's not just gold and jewels. Inside it are parchment scrolls, writings of St. Anselm himself, including a lost treatise on the nature of God that scholars have sought for centuries. If someone knows about those scrolls, they're worth more than the reliquary itself. A collector of rare manuscripts would pay millions. How would someone know about the scrolls? They're mentioned in the Archdiocese inventory from 1887, when the reliquary first arrived at St. Anselm's. Anyone doing thorough research would find that reference. My phone buzzed. Saul, with results. Archie, I've got Professor Thomas Brennan, sending you his Columbia faculty photo now. Also checked his background. He's been teaching at Columbia for 23 years, specializes in Byzantine art, well regarded in his field. No criminal record, no obvious connection to Hollister or the church. But here's the interesting part. Professor Brennan reported his faculty ID card stolen 3 months ago. Someone could be using it to access university resources. The photo came through. I showed it to Father O'Brien. Is this the man who might have adopted your mother's maiden name? He studied it carefully. No, I've never seen him before. Then someone stole his identity to research the church, I said. Someone who knew about Father O'Brien's connection to the Brennan name and used it as cover. Wolfe stood, a process that involved considerable effort and Caesar's patient waiting. Father O'Brien, thank you for your honesty. Despite your advanced age, you may yet be required to testify about these events. I trust you'll be available if needed. Of course, Mr. Wolfe, please find James Lockwood, and if possible, recover the reliquary. Whatever my sins, that sacred object doesn't deserve to be lost in the darkness of human greed. I intend to recover everything, Father, including the truth. We drove back to Manhattan in silence. Wolfe sat in the back seat with Caesar, his eyes closed, his breathing slow and regular. I knew better than to interrupt when he was in this state. He was assembling the pieces, constructing the pattern that would reveal the murderer. My phone rang as we crossed the Henry Hudson Bridge. Father Driscoll. Mr. Goodwin, I've set up the meeting with Professor Brennan. Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock, at the coffee shop near Columbia, Hungarian pastry shop on Amsterdam Avenue. He seemed eager to meet, said he had new information about the reliquary. Excellent. We'll be there. I relayed this to Wolfe. He opened his eyes. Good. We'll bring Saul, Fred, and at least 2 of the Dobermans. If Professor Brennan, or whoever is using that name, attempts to flee, we'll be prepared. You think it's Hollister pretending to be Brennan? Possibly. Or someone working with Hollister? The pattern is becoming clearer, but one piece remains missing. James Lockwood's location. He's either dead and hidden or alive and imprisoned. Until we know which, we cannot close the case. We arrived at the brownstone at 4:30. Mrs. Lockwood was waiting in the front room, her face drawn with exhaustion and fear. Mars sat near her, providing silent comfort in the way dogs do. Just presence, just constancy. Wolfe gave her the update. Father O'Brien's confession, the reliquary's history, the false Professor Brennan. She listened without interrupting, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. So someone stole the reliquary and possibly killed James for it, she said when he finished. Who? That remains to be determined. But tomorrow's meeting may provide the answer. Mrs. Lockwood, I need you to do something. Call Marcus Webb and tell him you've decided to sell the church. So you can't afford to continue the restoration without James. And you want Webb to prepare an estimate for securing the building before you turn it over to the Archdiocese. Why? What? Because whoever took your husband wants access to the church. If they believe you're abandoning it, they may make their move. We'll be watching. You're using the church as bait. I'm using the church as a trap. There's a difference. She agreed, and I walked her to the door. Before she left, she turned to me. Mr. Goodwin, do you think James is still alive? I could have lied. Instead, I said, I think if anyone can find him, it's Nero Wolfe. That's the truth. She nodded and left. Through the bulletproof window, I watched her car pull away, and I felt the weight of her hope like a physical thing. That evening, Wolfe assembled the plan. Saul and Fred would surveil the church overnight, watching for any unusual activity. Tomorrow morning, we'd meet the false Professor Brennan and confront him. And tomorrow night, Halloween, October 31st, we'd stake out the church to see who came for a final visit before the November 1st deadline mentioned in the wall writing. It's all connected, Wolfe said over dinner. Fritz's coq au vin, which deserved its own symphony. The letter threatening Lockwood, the November 1st deadline, the reliquary's removal from the storage unit. Someone is working on a timetable, and that timetable ends in 2 days. Whatever they plan to do, they must complete it by November 1st. We will intercept them before they can. What if they've already completed it? I asked. What if Lockwood is dead and buried, and the reliquary is gone? Then we will find his body and recover the reliquary anyway. Justice does not expire on a schedule. After dinner, I spent 2 hours on the phone, coordinating with Saul and Fred, arranging equipment, cameras, radios, flashlights, and confirming that Father Driscoll understood his role in tomorrow's meeting. By 10 p.m., everything was arranged. I was heading upstairs when the phone rang. Saul. Archie, you need to get to the church. Now. Fred saw someone enter through the basement door 10 minutes ago. Used keys, disabled the alarm like they knew the code. They're inside now. Who? Can't tell. Too dark. But they're carrying something. Looks like the duffel bag Hollister had. Fred's watching the exits. I'm in position on the street. Should we go in? No. Stay in position. Wolfe and I are coming. I ran to the office. Wolfe was reading, Caesar at his feet. The other Dobermans scattered on their rugs in various states of relaxation. Someone's in the church, right now. Saul and Fred are watching but haven't moved. Wolfe closed his book with a snap. Take Mars and Diana. Go immediately. I will follow with Caesar in the car. Call me when you've assessed the situation. And Archie? Yes? Be armed. And careful. Churches are no safer than anywhere else when humans are involved. I grabbed my gun, my flashlight, and my camera. Mars and Diana came alert immediately, sensing the change in atmosphere. We were in the car and moving within 3 minutes. The drive to Harlem took 20 minutes through light traffic. I called Saul from the car. Status? Subject is still inside. Fred saw lights in the crypt, flashlight beams moving around. No sounds, no alarms. Whoever it is knows the building. I'm 2 minutes away. Don't move until I arrive. I parked a block south and approached on foot with Mars and Diana flanking me. Saul materialized from shadows near the church entrance, a skill he's perfected over decades of surveillance work. Fred's at the back door, he whispered. No one's come out. I saw the lights in the crypt about 10 minutes ago. Then they went dark. Either they're done or they're hiding. Let's find out. I used Mrs. Lockwood's keys to open the main entrance. Slowly, quietly, careful not to trigger any sound. Mars and Diana entered first, noses working, ears scanning for threats. Saul followed with his gun drawn. The sanctuary was dark and cold, the October night seeping through the stone walls like water through a sieve. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating empty pews, the altar, the organ loft above. Nothing moved. We descended to the crypt level. The steel door Father Lockwood had installed was standing open, not forced but unlocked properly with keys. Beyond it, the LED lights were on, bright and harsh. The laboratory table was overturned. Files were scattered across the floor. The chemical analysis equipment was smashed, and in the center of the room, lying on its side, was the empty wooden crate from the storage unit. "They brought the reliquary here," I said quietly. "Why?" Mars growled softly, staring at one of the alcoves, the same one where we'd found the writing on the wall. Diana joined him, hackles raised. I approached carefully, flashlight raised. The alcove was no longer empty. James Lockwood sat against the back wall, unconscious or dead, his hands bound behind him with duct tape, his mouth gagged, his face bruised and swollen. Next to him sat the reliquary gold gleaming in my flashlight beam, jewels throwing back colored fire. "Saul, call 911. Tell them we need an ambulance at St. Anselm's Church immediately." I knelt beside Lockwood and checked his pulse. Weak but present. He was alive. "Mr. Lockwood, can you hear me?" His eyelids fluttered. I removed the gag carefully. He gasped, coughed, tried to speak. "Water," he croaked. Saul produced a bottle from somewhere. He always has what's needed. I helped Lockwood drink while Mars and Diana maintained watch on the crypt entrance. "Who did this?" I asked. "Quinn," Lockwood whispered. "Bernard Quinn. He knew all along about the reliquary, about Father O'Brien. His father told him everything. He's been waiting for me to find it so he could take it. He's the one who sent the letter. He threatened to reveal my family's past, the slum housing, the deaths, unless I found the reliquary and gave it to him. When I refused, he hit me, locked me down here, been here days. Where's Quinn now?" "Don't know. He came tonight, took the reliquary, said he was going to put it where no one would ever find it again, said the founding family's sins had to be buried forever." Footsteps on the stairs. I spun, gun raised, but it was Fred Durkin, breathing hard. Someone just ran from the church, went out the bell tower exit. I didn't even know there was one. Couldn't see who in the darkness. They're heading north on foot. "Fred, stay with Mr. Lockwood until the ambulance arrives. Saul, you're with me. Mars, Diana, let's go." We ran. The bell tower exit was a narrow door at the base of the northwest spiral staircase, hidden behind hanging vestments. It opened onto an alley running behind the church. In the distance, maybe a block ahead, I could see a figure running, stumbling, really, carrying something large and awkward. "There," I pointed. We pursued. Mars and Diana could have caught him in seconds, but I held them back. I didn't want the Dobermans attacking until I knew for certain it was Quinn and not some innocent person fleeing in panic. The figure turned east on 132nd Street, heading toward Lenox Avenue. I was gaining. Whoever it was wasn't in good shape for running. Then he turned again, ducking into another alley, and I realized where he was going. The old elevated train structure, abandoned since the subway replaced it decades ago. Metal stairs led up to the platform level, and the figure was climbing them, struggling with the weight of what he carried. "Bernard Quinn," I shouted. "Stop! Police are on their way." He didn't stop. He reached the platform and kept going, toward the center section where the tracks used to run. I followed, Mars and Diana beside me, Saul bringing up the rear. The platform was maybe 30 feet above street level, high enough that a fall would be serious. The figure stopped at the edge, turned to face us, and I finally saw him clearly in the ambient light from the street lamps below. Bernard Quinn, 71 years old, thin and frail, clutching the reliquary against his chest like a shield. His face was desperate, terrified, determined. "Stay back," he shouted. "I'll drop it. I swear I'll drop it and let it smash on the street." I held up my hands, gun pointed away. "Mr. Quinn, don't. That reliquary has survived 800 years. Don't destroy it now. It's cursed. My grandfather built that church with blood money. And this thing was bought with the same filthy gold. Father O'Brien was right to hide it, but he should have destroyed it. The founding family's sins are locked in this thing, and they need to stay buried. James Lockwood is alive, I said, moving slowly closer. Mars and Diana stayed at my sides, watching Quinn with intense focus. You didn't kill him. That means you can still walk away from this. Put down the reliquary, and we'll talk. I never meant to hurt James. I just wanted him to understand. The founding families destroyed so many lives. My grandfather, his grandfather, all of them. They built that church to wash their hands of blood. But blood doesn't wash away. It stains forever. This reliquary represents everything they were. Beautiful on the outside, rotten inside. So let the police handle it. Let historians document it. Let the truth come out properly. The truth? Quinn laughed, a harsh, broken sound. The truth is that 5 criminals built a monument to God and thought that would save their souls. It didn't. They all died miserable, and their descendants have been paying for their sins ever since. Raymond Hollister rotted in prison because James Lockwood inherited his great-great-grandfather's greed. Marcus Webb is drowning in debt because Cornelius Webb's company was built on corruption. My father spent his life as a caretaker, serving a church built with his father's violence. We're all cursed. That's superstition, not fact. Is it? Quinn took a step closer to the edge. Below, I heard sirens approaching. Fred must have called for backup. Then explain why everyone connected to that church has suffered. Explain why Father O'Brien had to hide this thing for 50 years. Explain why James Lockwood's obsession with it nearly got him killed. I can explain it, said a voice behind us. We all turned. Nero Wolfe stood at the top of the stairs, Caesar beside him, breathing heavily from the exertion of climbing, but otherwise composed. In the weird orange light from the street lamps, he looked like some vast monument that had decided to walk. Mr. Quinn, Wolfe said, his voice carrying across the platform with surprising volume, you have assembled facts incorrectly and reached false conclusions. You have also committed kidnapping and assault, but you have not yet committed murder or destruction of priceless historical artifacts. Do not make your situation worse through panic. Stay back. Quinn raised the reliquary higher. I'll drop it. You won't, Wolfe said calmly. Because you're a devout man who understands the sacred nature of what you hold. You may hate what it represents, but you cannot bring yourself to destroy it. That's why you brought it to the church tonight. You were returning it to where it belongs, not destroying it. Quinn's hands trembled. You don't understand. The sins, the blood. I understand perfectly. Your grandfather was violent. James Lockwood's grandfather was greedy. These are historical facts. But sins do not transfer generationally like property. You are not responsible for Patrick Quinn's violence any more than James Lockwood is responsible for his ancestors' exploitation. Your father understood this. That's why he protected Father O'Brien's secret without participating in the theft himself. He was trying to preserve something good that came from something bad. But the suffering is caused by human decisions, not supernatural curses. Raymond Hollister went to prison because James Lockwood committed fraud, not because of events in 18. Marcus Webb is in debt because he mismanaged his business, not because his great-great-grandfather bribed inspectors. You are suffering now because you made the mistake of believing that destroying evidence would destroy guilt. It won't. The past remains the past, unchangeable and instructive. The future is what we make of it. Quinn stood frozen, the reliquary held against his chest, tears streaming down his weathered face. Below, police cars arrived, their lights painting the scene in red and blue. Mr. Quinn, Wolfe said more gently, put down the reliquary. Tell the police what you did and why. Accept responsibility for your actions, not your grandfather's. That is the only way to end the curse you believe in, by choosing to act better than those who came before you. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, carefully, Bernard Quinn knelt and set the reliquary on the platform. His hands released it, and he sagged forward, covering his face, sobbing. I moved quickly, securing the reliquary and helping Quinn to his feet. He didn't resist. Mars and Diana relaxed slightly, sensing the crisis had passed. It's over, Quinn whispered. Thank God it's over. Yes, Wolfe said. The ghosts are banished. What remains is merely the work of living men and the consequences of their choices. It was nearly 3 a.m. by the time we returned to the brownstone. The police had taken Bernard Quinn into custody. kidnapping, assault, theft. James Lockwood was in the hospital, dehydrated and bruised but alive and recovering. The reliquary was in police evidence lockup, pending determination of its legal ownership. And Wolfe, Caesar and I were exhausted in the way that comes from too much drama and not enough sleep. Fritz had waited up, bless him, and had coffee and sandwiches ready. We ate in the office while I gave Wolfe the final details from the police interviews. Quinn broke down and confessed everything, I said. His father told him about Father O'Brien and the reliquary before he died. Bernard decided the reliquary represented everything evil about the founding families, and he wanted it destroyed. When James Lockwood started searching for it, Quinn panicked. He sent the threatening letter trying to scare Lockwood away. When that didn't work, he broke into Lockwood's home office and found his research notes showing he'd located the storage unit. So Quinn went to the storage unit first? Yes, used the key his father had given him. Found the reliquary was gone. Hollister had already taken it. Quinn assumed Hollister was going to sell it, so he tracked down Hollister at the halfway house and confronted him. And Hollister told him the truth. He wasn't stealing the reliquary. He was protecting it. Turns out Raymond Hollister's great-great-grandfather was Raymond Hollister Sr., one of the founding families. When Raymond got out of prison, he started researching his family history and discovered the story of the hidden treasures. He found out about Father O'Brien, tracked down the storage unit, and retrieved the reliquary. But he wasn't planning to sell it. He wanted to authenticate it and return it to the church properly, clearing his family name in the process. Wolfe grunted. An ex-convict attempting redemption. Ironic. Very. But Quinn didn't believe him. He thought Hollister was lying to protect his investment. So Quinn watched Hollister, followed him to St. Anselm's when he brought the reliquary there to show Father Driscoll. Wait. Hollister contacted Father Driscoll? Yes, that's where it gets complicated. Hollister called Father Driscoll, said he'd found something important, asked to meet at the church Sunday night. Father Driscoll agreed, but when Father Driscoll arrived, he found James Lockwood there instead. Lockwood had intercepted Hollister's message somehow and showed up to claim the... Where has Quinn been keeping it for the past week? In his apartment at the church, hidden under the floorboards. He was working up the courage to destroy it when we started investigating. That's why he told us about the organ playing and the candles. He wanted to scare everyone away. And the organ actually playing? Hollister. He'd learned to play in prison, music therapy program. When he came to the church to meet Father Driscoll, he went up to the loft and played Bach. Said it reminded him of better times before he destroyed his life. Quinn heard it from his apartment, saw that no one was visible at the console from his angle, and convinced himself it was supernatural. Wolfe shook his head. An entire case built on coincidence, misunderstanding, and the human tendency to see patterns in chaos. Mr. Quinn genuinely believed the reliquary was cursed, so he interpreted every event through that lens. Mr. Hollister was genuinely attempting redemption, so he acted secretively to protect his plan. Mr. Lockwood was genuinely obsessed with his family legacy, so he inserted himself into situations better left alone. And Father O'Brien's 57-year-old theft created the circumstances that brought them all together with tragic results. What about the false Professor Brennan? I asked. That was Hollister as well. He stole a Columbia faculty ID to access archdiocese records and university libraries, used Father O'Brien's mother's maiden name because he'd researched O'Brien thoroughly and knew it would provide credibility. When Father Driscoll agreed to meet him tomorrow, well, today, I suppose, Hollister planned to confess everything and ask for the church's forgiveness before returning the reliquary. He wanted to clear both his family name and Father O'Brien's conscience. So everyone had good intentions. Everyone had intentions they considered good. That's not the same thing. Good intentions poorly executed create chaos, indistinguishable from malice. I finished my sandwich and coffee. Outside the bulletproof windows, Manhattan was dark, except for the eternal glow of streetlights and the occasional passing car. Inside, the brownstone was warm and quiet, the Dobermans sleeping on their rugs, Fritz moving softly in the kitchen preparing for tomorrow's breakfast. Will Quinn go to prison? I asked. Almost certainly. He kidnapped and assaulted Mr. Lockwood. The prosecution will argue for significant jail time. And Hollister? More complicated. He stole the reliquary from the storage unit, but he can argue he was reclaiming his family's property. The reliquary was purchased with Hollister money in 1887. He also stole a faculty ID and committed fraud by impersonating Professor Brennan. But his intentions were redemptive rather than criminal. A good lawyer might negotiate a plea deal. And the reliquary? Will likely be returned to the church, where it should have remained all along. Father O'Brien's theft, though motivated by devotion, was still theft. The Archdiocese has legal ownership. What about Lockwood? Will he press charges against Quinn? Mrs. Lockwood indicated he intends to. However, she also said James has decided not to complete the church restoration. The project has been tainted by violence, and he wants nothing more to do with it. St. Anselm's will likely be sold back to the Archdiocese for demolition or conversion to some secular purpose. So the founding family's monument ends after 138 years. All monuments end eventually, Archie. Stone crumbles, memory fades, and history becomes legend, becomes myth, becomes forgotten. The founding families built St. Anselm's to preserve their legacy, but legacies cannot be preserved through architecture. They live only in the actions of descendants who choose whether to perpetuate evil or create good. The church was merely stone. What mattered was what people did inside it. He stood, a process that involved Caesar moving aside, and Wolfe leveraging himself upright with careful engineering. I'm going to bed. Instruct Fritz that tomorrow's breakfast should include his shirred eggs and the maple-cured bacon. Cases involving churches always require extra breakfast. You said that about buckwheat cakes earlier this week. Both statements can be true simultaneously. Good night, Archie. He lumbered out, Caesar following faithfully. I sat alone in the office for a while, looking at my notes, thinking about Bernard Quinn's face when he'd held that reliquary over the edge of the platform, the desperation, the conviction that he was doing something noble by destroying something beautiful. Diana came over and rested her head on my knee. I scratched behind her ears. People are complicated, girl. They do terrible things for good reasons and good things for terrible reasons, and sometimes you can't tell which is which until it's too late. She huffed softly, which I chose to interpret as philosophical agreement. I locked up the office, set the alarm system, and headed upstairs. Through the windows, I could see the first faint suggestion of dawn starting to grey the eastern sky. In a few hours, Fritz would start breakfast, Wolfe would descend from the plant rooms, and life at the brownstone would return to its usual rhythm. But somewhere in Harlem, St. Anselm's church stood empty and dark, waiting for whatever future awaited it. The ghosts were banished. The reliquary was recovered. James Lockwood was alive, and Bernard Quinn would spend the rest of his years paying for the sin of believing too strongly in the sins of the past. As for Nero Wolfe, he'd earned his fee, solved his case, and proved once again that reason trumps superstition. Logic defeats ghosts, and the truth, however complicated, is always preferable to the comfortable lie. I fell asleep thinking about churches and curses and the weight of history on human shoulders, and when I woke, sunlight was streaming through my window. Fritz was cooking bacon, and somewhere downstairs I could hear Wolfe's voice rumbling as he lectured Theodore about proper orchid nutrition. The brownstone, at least, remained exactly as it should be. The check from Mrs. Lockwood cleared without incident. 50,000 for the retainer, another 50 as the bonus for finding James alive, and an additional 25,000 as a thank you for recovering the reliquary. Wolfe banked it with his usual lack of sentimentality and immediately ordered 3 new Phalaenopsis hybrids from a specialist in Brazil. Bernard Quinn was charged with kidnapping and assault. His lawyer negotiated a plea deal, 5 years in prison with possibility of parole after 3. Given his age and health, it was possible he'd serve his sentence at a medical facility rather than a standard prison. Father Driscoll visited him weekly, providing spiritual comfort and books on medieval theology. Quinn told the priest he finally understood that the past couldn't be changed by destroying its evidence, only by choosing to live better in the present. Raymond Hollister was charged with theft and fraud. His lawyer, a sharp woman named Andrea Chen, argued that he'd been attempting to return stolen property to its rightful owner and should be credited with ultimately good intentions. The prosecutor was skeptical, but Hollister's cooperation with the investigation counted in his favor. He received 3 years probation, community service, and a requirement to remain in the halfway house for an additional year. Father Driscoll wrote a letter of support that apparently moved the judge. James Lockwood recovered from his physical injuries, though Mrs. Lockwood said the psychological trauma would take longer to heal. He sold St. Anselm's Church to a developer who planned to convert it into luxury apartments. a fate that seemed almost cruelly perfect, given the building's history. The founding family's monument to God would become housing for the wealthy. History's ironies are sometimes too obvious to require commentary. Father Patrick O'Brien lived another 6 months, long enough to see the reliquary returned to the archdiocese and placed in a museum where it could be properly preserved and displayed. He died peacefully in his sleep at St. Benedict's Senior Care, his conscience finally clear after 57 years of carrying the weight of his theft. Father Driscoll conducted the funeral service, and among the attendees were Bernard Quinn's lawyer, Raymond Hollister, and representatives from Columbia University's Medieval Studies Department. The ancient priest who'd stolen to preserve beauty was mourned by the very institutions he'd defied. As for Wolfe and me, we returned to our usual routine. Cases came and went. The orchids bloomed on schedule. Fritz cooked masterpieces. The Dobermans maintained their watchful presence, Caesar following Wolfe, Diana keeping me company, the others distributing themselves throughout the brownstone in a pattern that seemed random but probably wasn't. On a cold evening in late November, Kramer stopped by unannounced, his way of checking whether we'd caused any new trouble he should know about. Wolfe received him in the office with beer and tolerance, which for him qualified as warm hospitality. The Quinn case closed properly, Kramer said, accepting a bottle of Remmers. But I want to make something clear, Wolfe. When you have information about a missing person, you bring it to the police immediately. You don't conduct independent investigations that result in confrontations on abandoned elevated platforms at midnight. The confrontation was necessary to preserve evidence and prevent destruction of historical artifacts, Wolfe said blandly. Also to save Mr. Lockwood's life, which the police had been notably unsuccessful in protecting. We were investigating. You were investigating nothing. Detective Rowcliffe dismissed Mrs. Lockwood's concerns as melodramatic and Mr. Quinn's reports as senile fantasy. If I hadn't accepted the case, James Lockwood would be dead and a priceless reliquary would be smashed on a Harlem street. Kramer glared, but he couldn't really argue with results. Next time, send competent detectives initially, and I won't need to clean up afterward. After Kramer left, muttering about private investigators and overreach and regulations, Wolfe finished his beer and looked at me. Archie, I have decided something. What's that? No more cases involving churches. They invariably feature excessive drama, supernatural nonsense, and theological complications that distract from rational investigation. If a client arrives with a haunted cathedral, a possessed synagogue, or a cursed mosque, you will inform them that we are unavailable. What if they pay exceptionally well? He considered. Then we will make an exception, but only for exceptional money. Got it. No ghosts unless they're expensive ghosts. Precisely. Outside, November rain began its steady percussion against the bulletproof windows. Inside, Fritz was preparing dinner. Roast duck with wild rice, if the smell from the kitchen was any indication. The Dobermans slept on their rugs, peaceful and content, and Nero Wolfe sat behind his desk, master of his domain, convinced once again that reason could solve any mystery, intelligence could defeat any deception, and the truth, however much humans tried to bury it, would always eventually come to light. As for me, I made a note in my private records. St. Anselm's case closed. No actual ghosts. All mysteries explained. Client satisfied. Fee paid. Murderer caught. Victim alive. Wolfe's batting average remains perfect. Status. Back to normal. Diana agrees that churches are complicated. She's a very smart dog.